Hey, what's up, everybody? I think we are live now. So I'll give things a second for people to come in here. So tonight the plan is just to hang out, answer some questions. Haven't had a video in a little bit. Haven't gone live this week yet, so I wanted to get a live out there just to hang out with people and answer some questions, have some conversations. Obviously, the big news today being the CGC pop reports. I have had a chance to look at it just a little bit. Gonna be planning on doing a deep dive on the Patreon this month into those numbers and probably comparing it to PSA, trying to figure out how to make use of the info and the data. It's definitely going to be really helpful to see, because prices generally on CGC didn't get as crazy high. It's going to be probably in some cases a more helpful look at what people have been sort of grading all along the last 6 months. So I'm definitely looking forward to digging into those numbers more. No big surprises at first glance, outside of maybe just how low the perfect tens were. Though that was pretty low. Let's see, as people kind of start to come in here. Hey, HCWA, Mr. Locknet, and Jeremy, and Chevels. Chevel says, "Why go live? Why PK and Swam are going at it?" I've been trying to hold off. I was actually watching and hanging out in that stream, but tonight was sort of my night to put out this video. I wanted to make sure I did a video, so I was trying to wait as long as I could. I actually wanted to go live like an hour and a half ago, but instead played a board game with my girlfriend, and then was watching the stream a little bit because I try not to. We definitely have some overlap in audience, and I try not to either pull people away from that great conversation. Obviously, I'm a big fan of both of those guys, but it's all right if we have a bit fewer viewers to start, and then kind of it builds. I mean, most people watch these videos afterwards anyway, and not live, not during it. So. But definitely no offense, Travel's taken, if you want to, hang out in that stream and finish that conversation. Do whatever you feel like doing. Will says, "I'm excited to hear your take on the Patreon this month on CGC Pops. I've been analyzing the power port all day." Yeah, a lot of good data in there. It's going to be super useful. I'm excited that you guys know I'm a big fan of Pokemetrics and what they're doing, and they're going to be Petrie fan who's in the Patreon, in the Discord. I think wrote in there today that he is planning on, and I probably put this on his Instagram as well, that he's going to be putting that data into the Pokemetrics website. So that'll be great, and I also wonder if there's going to be sort of a comparison feature to PSA. All that stuff's super interesting. I love data. It's part of what I enjoy about the hobby. Obviously, I just love the cards and love looking at the cards. But I also love the market stuff and seeing what people are doing, what people are interested, what people are grading, and what things are selling at. It's all part of what makes the hobby so fun for me. Kelvin Corp says, "Hey Jake, hope you're doing well. Greetings from the Netherlands. Thank you for joining." Of course, a familiar name. Pokemon Breeder Max, how you doing? We got Vedu here. Jordan McCormick says, "Hey man, what do you think about the Charizard Shiny GX and other super rare Charizards from other sets?" So Charizard Shiny GX. So I assume you're just talking about the Hidden Fates, because that's the only one that I guess is just Charizard Shiny GX and not the Charizard Shiny V or the Charizard Shiny V Max from the Sword and Shield block. So what do I think about it? It's a great card. in terms of the market, I guess I'll first, answer just personally. Do I like the card or not? I've always liked that card as soon as it came out. I've always enjoyed Hidden Fates. I really, really enjoyed Shiny GX, which really came a year before Hidden Fates. So I was already sort of a bit done with Hidden Fates when Hidden Fates was really popular to the masses, we could say, because I was really opening up and enjoying collecting and trying to complete a Shiny GX set, which for those who don't know, that's the Japanese version. Usually the Japanese set comes out much closer to the English release. In this case, it was like almost a whole year. We actually, a lot of people don't know this who weren't in the hobby or just kind of deep in it at the time, but there was a lot of conversation happening that we didn't think we were ever going to get Shiny GX in English. We didn't think we were ever going to get a Hidden Fates, and there was actually some negativity around Hidden Fates, interestingly, when it first came out that I was seeing on YouTube. This is actually long before I had a channel. And not long before, but a year before or so. So it would have been interesting to hear because I probably would have shared some of those opinions too, potentially. It's interesting how things can shift. But there was a little bit of negativity because it was like, we're already sort of bored of this set. We want something new. Why'd they wait so long? In some areas of the hobby. Obviously, a bunch of the newer people coming in then it was their first time experiencing that set. It's an awesome set. I think now we're seeing probably a little bit of that. It's part of why I've actually been buying up some of it. I've actually stopped because I sort of have enough of it, and there's a ton out there. But I have some of all the cards from that set because, interestingly enough, a lot of the cards from that set, I'm not sure if the Charizard's kind of moved up and down in various times, but a lot of the cards from that set are actually selling lower now than they sold when the set first came out, or near when the set first came out. That's not true for hardly any set, and certainly not true for any Sun and Moon sets. It's amazing the difference in prices. Like when we look at something like a Lugia from Lost Thunder, like the Rainbow Rare from Lugia, that was a $15, $20 card back in the day, around that time, and now it's $200, $300, at a PSA 10, I think $1,000. So it's very interesting to see kind of which ones have grown, which ones haven't. But part of why I give all of that data and background info is it does make it interesting to kind of be buying Hidden Fates right now, and shows that there's probably a pretty decent value. It also, to me, shows how much they printed of Hidden Fates. Like, I think they've printed, just by the amount, and we can see in the CGC Pop Report too, just how much Hidden Fates were graded. Similar to PSA, the vast majority of cards that have been graded have been Evolutions, Hidden Fates, and Base Set Unlimited. By a large margin. And then with like Champion's Path and like Vivid Voltage and Shining Fates starting to like creep up a little bit. But in the distant rear view mirror. And part of that is because of the amount of chase cards in these sets, and so the amount of cards that are gradable in these sets is much larger than some of these other Sun and Moon sets that maybe only had 13 to 20 gradable cards. Hidden Fates has like 70, 80 at least, fairly gradable cards when you include all the baby shinies and trainers and the full arts and there's just so much. And then obviously the full art shinies, but so I think it's generally a decent time to buy that set. I also think we might find out that there was just a ton of it printed, a lot of it being graded, and it might really take some time for prices on that set to kind of appreciate and go up, at least on the singles. The sealed product is a little bit of a different story. Very hard to predict sealed product. Who knows how much is still sealed versus how much has been opened. Clearly a lot of it's been opened, but also definitely more than probably any set in history up to that point, there is Hidden Fates being stored as like an investment opportunity, because Hidden Fates and Evolutions, but Hidden Fates, I think more than anything, was like the set to invest in, and so, you just want to be, that sort of hurts the set, I think, in the short to medium term and maybe also the long term, but I think that will be offset over time by just the quality of the set and the overall popularity of the set. It has so many like rookie shining type cards that it's just hard to imagine that it won't stay popular for a really long time. It's the only set that I would feel pretty confident would stay popular. Like in 10 to 20 years from now, Pokemon is still thriving and hopefully quite a bit bigger than it is today. Sun and that would be the only set, and this is an unpopular opinion because people say, what about Evolving Skies is such a great set, or Brilliant Stars, or Cosmic Eclipse, or it's like these sets are all wonderful to open, but as a unique identity and something that I really think can really stand the test of time and be very, very different than anything else, I don't think any of those sets really fit that bill. I think that they're just excellent, well-designed sets within their era. Hidden Fates sort of seems to me, just with all of the Shining cards, just seems like a standout. Just my personal opinion. But yes, that's a long answer with hopefully some useful data on on that Charizard and why that Charizard and more broadly the set is a good pickup or sort of a bad pickup. There are always pluses and minuses. Try to give you some nuance here. Let's see. We got Kareem here and Polaris, Joe Cartwright, Shu, Pokeslam. Pokeslam says, "Hey Jake, what's your take on the PSA Vault announcement and eBay's? Do you plan on using either? Thanks." I don't really have too much of a take. I have not used vaults. I really like to have my collection with me, and the majority of the cards that I have are part of my collection. I've been buying more, I guess, stuff that I considered sending to the PWCC vault for a while. This was before PWCC separated from eBay because I just had a lot of stuff, and they were doing some deals where you could send them in for free, basically. And it was tempting just because it's so easy. I was planning on selling a lot of this stuff, and it was so easy to then just click a button and sell it. But I did decide against that, just because when I'm ready to sell, I just send it to PWCC or list it on eBay or make it known to certain friends or people I talk to on Instagram, for example, where I sell a decent amount or have sold a decent amount in the past, that I'm looking to sell these items or open to sell these items. And in the meantime, I just kind of want to keep them around because it makes me happy to have them around, and I guess it's worth the risk of damage or theft or those types of things for me personally. But I do think that if I was doing something like Dan or Gotta Catch 'Em All or Nick, like Old School, or a number of other people who are full-time selling, I would definitely be using more of those vaults as a way to both store and then quickly list items and inventory that I want to sell. If I wasn't ready to sell it that exact day. If I'm ready to sell it that exact day, I'm just going to throw it up on eBay on my store. If I really want to get rid of it, I'll throw it up in auction. Generally speaking, I wouldn't recommend that. Generally I would do list it as a best offer, buy it now, and then just wait for it to be sold there. But if I have a large amount of inventory and some of it I'm looking to maybe hold for a little bit, but I want to sell within the next few months, and I want to expedite that process and be able to put it quickly into a variety of different selling platforms, I think that those options are really good, are really strong for people. I think I'd definitely be looking into that. So hopefully that answer helps. Gus says, have you picked up any illustration Charizards? I've been picking them up in PSA 9 for around $12. I missed the boat to get them for free, but now I'm essentially paying the cost of grading. I have not. I think I have one or something. I'm surprised they're only $12 for PSA 9s. I haven't been following them. But yeah, that seems like certainly a good price for, particularly if it's a card that you really like and enjoy. To be completely honest with you, I'm not following that card super closely. That seems cheap to me. But I would want to look more into sort of the pop reports, how many of them are being graded, how many people are actually buying them. I know a lot of people had like hundreds, like bought hundreds and hundreds of them to grade and sit on. I would want to, connect with those folks to see, I use a lot of, not insider info, but I use a lot of info that I get from like people who are actively selling hundreds and hundreds or thousands of cards to kind of get a sense of like, what are the items that are selling the most right now? How much are you able to sell them? How much are they moving? Because then I can make better decisions about which cards to pick up for myself. So those I do not have. I have not really been following or looking into, but I might have to now because $12 seems, at least on the surface, like, worth looking into at least. Obi-Wan Kenobi says, with CGC pop reports being available, could be fun to look through some popular sets and get your thoughts on it. We could do that potentially if I could set that up. It's a little bit, I don't think I can do it through the way I have this set up, or I don't really know how tonight, but maybe we can do that in the future. I do want to do more of those like eBay treasure hunty. We can look up articles, look up other sorts of things, and maybe respond or react to like more videos or other content out there, because I think those things are fun and provide a good variety of content. VDGMS says, Jake, anything jump out to you that you didn't already expect to see with the CGC pop reports? So as I said before, probably the main thing was just how low the perfect 10s were. Outside of that, and maybe just like how many cards they graded, although I was expecting it to be a lot. Honestly, I've been seeing so much CGC cards hitting the market, and I've had so many sellers contact me looking to like liquidate 100, 200, 300 CGC slabs that they just want to get off of. I'm not that surprised by the fact that it's like, what is it, 70 or 80% or something I was reading. It's like 1.3 million or something versus like 1.8 million. PSA being 1.8 million, CGC being 1.3 million Pokemon cards graded this year, something like that. So they've gotten a lot of business, and people have really graded a lot with them. So it's a lot. And obviously the majority of that being base set unlimited, evolutions and hidden fates, as I was talking about before. I think hidden fates being maybe 50, 60,000, evolutions like around 90,000 or so, and I forget exactly base unlimited. I really just briefly looked through the reports, but I think those were the numbers that stood out to me, and not too different, believe it or not, from PSA. Very, very similar breakdown, which is very interesting. And as I said in the beginning, I know more people are coming in now. This month on the Patreon, we'll do a deeper dive into all of the data. But it's very interesting to see that a lot of this stuff was graded about the same in CGC versus PSA, even though PSA was more expensive. Now, part of that is because still so much of what's now coming back from PSA and what's been graded at PSA got in still at those like $10, $12, $15 price tiers, or up to $25 price tiers. But a lot of the stuff too coming back now, it's hard to know the exact breakdown. I just got a submission back that was a year and 3 months old, that only got graded maybe, got through grading and put in the pop reports maybe 3 months ago or so. It's hard to know. I would think that the majority of the sort of those like, baby shiny type cards, amazing rares, full arts, kind of lower tier rainbow rares, your lower tier, full art shining cards, and your, non-Charizard hollow cards from evolutions, would have to be more sort of in that bulk, the majority of it in those bulk lower tiers, but it's I know people who were so bullish on evolutions and were so bullish on some of these sets that they were sending in cards that at $100 or $150 that are now worth like $9, $10, $15, $20 because they got PSA 9s, these types of things. So it's there's a lot of people who made money, a lot of people who lost money, and it's been a bit chaotic for sure. And there's a lot of people who like haven't like who feel it like who haven't sold yet. They're sort of holding, hoping that these things will kind of go back up in price too. Nadia76 says, do you think we are seeing a fake out in the recovery of the overall market and Pokemon that the Pokemon market is seeing right now? So it's really hard. I'm someone who, again, is bidding on 5 to 10,000 generally items a month and is just like trying to watch every part of the hobby. It's a big hobby. I'm also involved in, 3 or 4 other hobbies, and it's a lot of info to kind of track and sort of keep all in your head or on a piece of paper in some sort of spreadsheet. But I try my best to kind of get a general sense of the market and where we're at right now. And I do feel like sort of December, was sort of the low, and then we had a little bit of an uptick, and then a little bit of a downtick, and now a little bit of an uptick again. But it's I would say that that nothing has moved significantly enough that I would say that we're in any sort of new significant trend. We see like Rudy come out with videos saying like the Pokemon bear market is over, and when he makes that video, like all he's talking about really in that video is the brand new modern set, which frankly has a lot more to do with how much Pokemon decides to print or reprint and just the strength of the set than any sort of like big fundamental change in like Pokemon interest. I mean, the Pokemon market has always been strong throughout this entire period. What happened is that demand did go down a little bit, the stonkage and the optimism went down a little bit, so people became more patient. But in my opinion, the real reason prices went down a lot was simply because just more supply was hitting the market and more mint supply was finally getting created and back on the market. And so so the same amount of demand was not able to absorb all of that supply. And the people who a lot of people over-leveraged themselves, couldn't continue to buy at those higher prices to continue to drive them up. And then we had some people obviously leave because they lost money, they felt burned out, or they just decided or felt that they didn't, enjoy the hobby anymore, these types of things, which is all, normal, sort of the normal ebb and flow of any hobby. And there's absolutely nothing. I think people get a little bit too nervous or anxious or upset about other people kind of coming in and out of the hobby, or themselves kind of wanting to take breaks and, then coming back. And that's part of it because people love the hobby so much and it's so important to them. But I think it's also really important just to keep in mind that like this is going to be here forever, this type of market, probably a number of these types of communities, whether it's this community or other communities, and there just is no rush. So going back to your comment, though, saying, is it a fake out? Is this recovery a fake out? I think we're within a window right now that it seems about an even, a lot of supply is continuing to come back, but we're also having a decent amount of demand and a decent amount of buying power and interest to continue to buy a fair bit, a lot of that supply back up from the modern to the vintage side. I'm seeing definitely some, I'm getting deals on PWCC occasionally at like 60% of what eBay sells the next day. And then I'm seeing things on PWCC selling for, 20 or 30% more than it did on eBay the next day. So it's really a time where if you're not super, super engaged and you're not seeing tons and tons of price points from all different sites, you can really, I think, lose the narrative, which in my opinion is that there's just kind of a lot of chaos, some higher prices, some lower prices, but that overall I think we're going to reach a consolidating sort of calmer, more steady period at a certain point. You're always going to have these outliers in these auctions, some of these outlier prices, and whether that trends slightly upwards over time or trends slightly downwards, and it might trend slightly upwards on certain sets and certain cards and then trend slightly downwards on other sets and other cards. And then you have things like, Logan Paul buying a Pikachu Illustrator and, hype and maybe getting some big sports people back in, or some big money people to kind of buy out some big trophy cards, and you could see huge exponential growth on certain cards because there aren't that many of them, and the rich people kind of all go after them, or the super rich go after them. We've talked a lot about that on this channel, and the potential of those types of cards to explode in value with just a few people willing to pay sort of a lot more than people were willing to pay just a few months before. But outside of those types of things, yeah, that's what I'd say for the overall market. We're sort of in a calm, kind of calm. Liquidity is generally good. I think people's businesses are doing pretty good. But it's not the same type of environment where you buy something and then 2 weeks later you look and you made 20% or 15 to 20%, for sure. I think it takes a little bit more research, takes a little bit more understanding of the pop reports and the data, and takes a little bit more patience to really buy things, under market or in large lots to make money in this sort of space. And that's what I, have been doing. And again, I'm really not looking to make money. I'm looking mostly to break even these days and then just continue to build my collection. I'm planning on being in Pokemon forever. I don't really care what anyone else thinks. I love this channel, I love this community, and I love hearing other people's opinions, and I love that so many people love Pokemon, but I just personally really like it, and I have my own collection goals, and I want to collect all of the cards that I really want and build a museum and all the other types of things that I talked about one day. And so that's sort of my long-term goal, is just continuing to make progress on those collection goals. I've been working on the Sun and Moon era a decent amount, looking into XY. As prices have sort of dipped on certain cards in those eras, I've been trying to pick some of those up. Always working on sort of those high-end, more difficult stuff to find, and that stuff's just gonna, it's just fun to continue to chip away at it, looking for those trophy cards, looking for those, PSA 10, first edition WotC hollows that are super low pop, or the gold stars, or what have you. Calvin Corp says, I noticed that a lot of sellers are quitting Pokemon since boxes don't triple in a day. Also from distribution, I can now buy freely product and have a just-in-time model instead of high inventory model. So that's interesting. I really don't know how many sellers are leaving right now or quitting Pokemon. But it's definitely interesting to hear, your perspective. The sellers that you're talking to, or the people that you're talking to. Obviously, everyone has their own sort of, community, or they get their own information from different places. It doesn't surprise me that a number of people would be quitting or downsizing. I do think it's really tough right now to be if you want to go full time in Pokemon, unless you have a lot of capital and a lot of experience, it's going to be probably really tricky and not worth it financially in most cases. I do think it's a side hobby or hustle, and if you love it, it's great to do, and you can always do it, and I will always be doing it, and so many people will always be doing it. I think the vast majority of people in my Discord, we definitely have, LGS owners in there, and people who run full-time Pokemon businesses, whether it's online or have physical game stores. We have those people in there, but the vast majority of people are more looking to build collections and doing a little bit of flipping in order to fund that, and are not needing to make crazy huge returns where they are using that money to pay bills. They don't need to make $4,000 or $5,000 a month in net profit in order to pay their bills. If you quit your job and you go full time and you're really looking to make that amount, it becomes much more of a grind and a lot more difficult to do consistently. Puts a lot more pressure, and you really have to sell. You have to constantly find things to flip and sell. It's part of why I don't want to do it, is I'm not interested in that, and I like to sell when I'm ready to sell. Either I don't feel a connection to an item and don't feel the need to hold that item anymore, or I feel like financially it's like a really good time to sell that item, and maybe I can buy it back cheaper later, and or put it into something else that I think is going to go up quicker, or is harder to come by, harder to find. Retrograded here and Pac Menace. Nice to see ya. Nutty. Let's see what we got here. Retrograded says, been picking up a good number of first edition WotC CGC 9s, pretty dang low. Trick is going to be trying to figure out when they moved to less strict grading. Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch the pop reports over time. And we also just like don't know the extent of that, right? And if that's like a permanent shift or a permanent thing, and really what that's really gonna look like. I know that that's the word on the street, is that all of a sudden now they're giving perfect 10s or at least CGC 10s, that they're giving them out quite a bit easier than the current pop report would suggest. It's just Jacob says, anyone recommend a bit for play promos for a while? I know Dan had quite a bit more luck than me doing that. Did I just freeze? Or are we still good, guys? Let me know if the thing froze. I think we're probably still good. Yeah. So, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, Facebook groups, but that was always the one that because there were players on there, that I could find some of those cards that like players would win, like World's promos. I actually use Facebook groups more for other hobbies. I really get great deals in like DBZ and that was the main one that I used it for, actually. That was where but I've heard really good things about like the Marvel Facebook groups as getting like much better deals on like PMGs and all sorts of Marvel cards. So let's see. People saying it did freeze. Seems to be low FPS. Yeah, I wonder why. It's weird. I haven't had any issues in a while, I feel like. Hopefully it's smooth from here, but let's see. Maybe I can fix it. Let me just try to fix it quickly. I don't know. It looks like it's fairly smooth now, so hopefully it's fine. I'm just gonna keep going. I guess we'll keep plowing ahead. It says stream health is now excellent again. Oh, and now it's freezing again? Oh no. Alright, well, we'll just keep plowing through. Think FTBD says, hey Jake, I'm really trying to fill my binder collection of Shadowless in first edition. I'm not looking for near mint. Where would you recommend to start? TCG, eBay, Mercari? I'm not looking for near mint. So does that mean you're looking for like light play or even like worse? So I would say, where should you start? Yeah. I mean, you can look on places like Verbank and the Facebook group we just talked about for stuff like that. I would try to buy like someone's like collection, not ungraded collection potentially from a place like that. Certainly eBay. TCG player, TCG player might be a good place to like buy one specific card, but generally speaking, it's going to be fairly expensive there as compared to buying certainly in like a larger lot on eBay. I mean, eBay is your best bet pretty much all of the time. Like, you can certainly find better deals off of eBay if you get lucky and fortunate, but you can also spend a lot of time looking and find really nothing on a place like Mercari. TCG players, very easy to find like singles. You can just look up like the exact card you want, and then you can see a number of prices. you could definitely start. I would start on TCG Player and eBay and compare the prices, because sometimes I do go on TCG Player and see, someone is looking to sell something and list it for fairly low, but usually auctions are going to be your best bet, probably on eBay. It's really a matter of just kind of putting in the time and the effort, and it depends how quickly you want the item. If you just want it quickly, you can do buy it now eBay, buy it now TCG Player. But if you really want to get the best deal, I would just be patient and try to win some decent looking cards that come up in auction. Or, again, as I said before, if you can, even better if someone's selling a completed set in auction, and those will come up. It's just a matter of sort of waiting. It can take a long time. It could take months, many months to find a good deal. But that's the what I would be doing. Pac-Man says, I wish there were a Discord for trading PSA Pokemon cards. Yeah, I mean, we've thought about adding some of doing a trade feature in our Discord. The problem is just, what if people aren't trustworthy? These types of things. Trading, generally speaking, the best way to trade is to find trusted middlemen. So the way to use a middleman in a trade is if you and someone else are trading, let's say Pac-Man is you and It's Just Jacob is the comment under you. You guys are trading. You could both send your cards to me or someone that you trust, who's a public figure of some sort, or is probably not gonna cheat you. So the way it would work is, once I got both of your cards, then I would send out the cards you sent me to It's Just Jacob, and the cards It's Just Jacob sent to Pac-Man. And that way, if one person doesn't send the cards to me, then I just send your cards back to you, and you don't get scammed or taken advantage of. So I've used middlemen before for big trades, and it's definitely really effective, and just takes a lot of the anxiety out of the process. Let's see, got Basic Trainer in the chat. What's up, man? Mason Berry, nice to see ya. Retro Specs. Kareem, Lord Pokebloke says, hey, Jake, how's it going? It's going pretty well tonight. Was trying to wait till PK's stream was over, or late in his stream at least. So I don't know if they're still going. Maybe they're done now. But Blake Jenton says, I know the market can swing rapidly, but you think it's been rather stable lately, week to week. Yeah, I mean, overall, it's been fairly stable. I mean, it's more like it was before the last 2 years. I would say the last 2 months have been two of the most overall stable months in terms of pricing. Of course, you're seeing, crazy wild swings in some cards, but overall you're seeing certainly 20 to 30% swings in certain cards. But that's just normal, and that just has to do one auction to the next. Mr. Pokedragon says, I think in general the Poke market will crab sideways until the lead up to the 30th anniversary. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really so if Pokemon comes out with some things around the 30th anniversary, like a metaverse video game that every kid in the world is playing, and every teenager and every young person's playing, and it brings a ton of people back to Pokemon, that's the type of thing that I think would have an impact. Or if influencers, there's a surge again of influencers at that time, or new influencers or younger influencers who are maybe in their early 20s now. But definitely reasonable, to think that it'll, crab sideways or, slightly go up. I do think that certainly some things will move. Overall, for those who don't know, between the year about 2017, from 2016 to 2017, most of the market went down, and a lot of items actually halved in price. Now, the prices were so much lower then that it was a lot less intense, and significant in a lot of ways than this fall. So I do want to make that clear that they're quite different in that sense. But on a percentage basis, you did see some things, certainly a number of things fall, 30 to 50%. Similar to this time, obviously, we saw some things falling like 90%, 80%, 70% in this period. And then, around 2017 and 2018, we sort of saw it solidify and consolidate. And I'm really talking right now, particularly about like WotC first edition holos, Gold Stars, original Nintendo EX era. Now you had a few different periods where like Skyridge boomed a little bit because like Leonhardt, I think, was talking about it, and you had a Gold Star sort of period where Gold Stars were really hot and everyone really wanted Gold Stars all of a sudden. So there are a few periods in there that you see a little bit of kind of outlier growth. But overall, generally speaking, 2017, 2018 we saw consolidating, and then from 2018 to 2020, we saw pretty steady growth, and then all of a sudden certain sets would kind of pop up, I would see, and it almost felt like certain sets were starting to get like bought out a little bit. This is WotC Wizards of the Coast. All this time Modern was doing nothing. Modern was just sort of flat, mostly unsellable, to be completely honest. In terms of like making a profit, obviously businesses were doing well, and we're selling playable cards and doing mass box openings for making a little bit, and game stores were certainly surviving, but nothing like we saw this year. But that part of the market just didn't exist really. So that part of the market, that whole Modern market, is all brand new in terms of like investing or stonking or whatever word we want to use. But yeah, so the WotC stuff consolidated and then really blew up, and now it's fallen about 40% in value. Some things falling up to like 70, 80%. Some things only down 20 or so percent. Some things not down at all. Some of the rarest items, the lowest pop items. And that's where we're at right now, and it'll be interesting to see, if that sort of consolidates again, and where prices move next. I wanted to make a video saying like I have no idea what's going to happen next, because I don't. I can just know what's happened in the past. I can understand. Not understand, but follow and try to be on top of like the trends and what people are talking about and what people are feeling. And I can try and buy things or invest in things that to me seem undervalued or underappreciated, and then sort of see what happens. I really don't think anyone can do any better than that right now. There's also just a lot of global economic, questions that are just always looming about collectibles in general, and that could impact all of these types of alternative asset or collectible type markets. So I don't predict the future unless it feels very obvious. Like when I was fine not predicting the timing, but saying that we were in a pretty big bubble because of the type of thinking that was happening a year ago, and the fact that I knew how much stuff was going to be graded, and there were so many factors that made me very confident then. I don't feel very confident now to predict what's next, but if I had to guess, I would guess that, and this is not a confident guess, but I would guess that we are going to, some things are this is what I would guess. The rarer things are going to slowly move up, barring some sort of large economic downturn. The rare things are going to slowly move up, while the less rare things are going to take a lot longer to kind of consolidate. Once those less rare things consolidate, those things will start to move up as well. That's my guess. And then I think you're going to see some really high-end and trophy-type items potentially take off. And 10x. I mean, you just never know. Like, there are going to be some items that I think are just so undervalued, like shockingly undervalued by the hobby, and given like the rarity and, in my opinion, the historic importance to the hobby. So, but all it takes is sort of an influencer buying that, or a few rich people getting in on it, or being sold that is a cool thing, a valuable thing to own. I highly doubt that, and I could be completely wrong about this, but I highly doubt that Logan Paul knew what a Pikachu Illustrator was a year and a half ago. like when he probably got back into Pokemon, he probably didn't even know what a Pikachu Illustrator was, but he was told by people that this is the most valuable card, this is the best card in the hobby, and you know he wants the best, and so that's why he was willing to pay $6 million for the best card in the hobby, right? And so that's when these narratives are created about, you know, what's the best card, what's the card that everyone wants, what's the card that's going to get you the most kind of like respect or eyes on you or attention or all these types of things. And it's easier to create narratives around cards that are really good looking, that are really rare, that are really historic, all of that type of stuff. Who knows? I'm not going to be the one, you know, who's, you know, obviously I'm not I'm not someone who is looking for, how best to put it. Let's see how to put this well. So I think that, you know, someone like a Logan Paul or some of these sort of ultra famous people who are constantly doing things to grab attention and grab eyes and be in the public eye and the focus, like those are going to be the people, whether we like it or not, are going to be the people who are market makers in large ways and have large, not only through their own money, through making a big purchase like that can they make a lot of money, but through wearing that at WrestleMania and then cementing that card as the most valuable card, the most important card, and then having a lot of, you know, media, you know, small YouTube channels like this up to large YouTube channels to all sorts of different social media and news channels and all sorts of things talking about it and then saying, you know, $6 million card, the most expensive card ever, the most important card in the hobby, you know, these types of things. So it really doesn't bother me that happens, actually, just for me personally. It's more just so you have to like adapt and understand that that is often how certain items become extremely expensive. So let's see what else we got here. Brevity Gaming says, "Sup, Jake? Check out the Latios and Latias GX from Sun and Moon. You've covered it before, but look at the price and listings. Glad to catch a live. Why don't you let me know if it's like has it gone down quite a bit or up quite a bit? I don't know what's happening there. I think that card was like over $1,000 in PSA 10 for a while, and then it came all the way down to maybe like 400 or 300. I'm not sure. Maybe it's going back up. Maybe it's down. I don't know." Kevin Clear says, "I think the 30th anniversary won't be enough and people won't flock back until 35th. Yeah, I think it's going to be more, it has a lot less to do with like an anniversary and more to do with like what is Pokemon going to do for the anniversary for me, right? It's what are they actually going to do that's actually going to bring people's attention and interest to the hobby, and what are influencers going to do and other sorts of people going to do." Alexander says, "Will be interesting to see how slabs are absorbed into the market. Got any ideas on time horizon of this?" So as I was saying before, I think that, right, the rarer items that are not, you know, I'd really be watching those pop reports. There are a lot of people out there who and I think the vast majority of the market do not watch the pop reports and do not actually look at the data. And I very strongly believe, I think that my success is primarily due to looking at the data. So it's well, hugely just luck based, first of all. let's start with luck and timing and the fact that I had quite a bit of money to actually put into this. Let's start with all of those things as prerequisites. Once we get through those things, it's my actual willingness to kind of like look into data and make purchase decisions based on the fact that like supply and demand. And what is supply and demand at the end of the day? You're trying to predict demand, which can be pretty difficult, but the supply side is highly based on the data. So we can figure out supply both in just doing your research in terms of trying to figure out how much of a card is actually printed, what is for set cards, what is the actual pull rate, how much of the set we think is printed versus something else. It's a very difficult thing to determine. We can do it in a variety of different ways. One way is actually getting data from the Pokemon Company or from other sources. We have been able to get that for certain sets over the years, not from the Pokemon Company directly, and nothing absolutely exact, but enough to kind of have a sense of probably how many booster boxes or how many cards were printed in certain eras versus other eras. A little bit, have some sense. But the other best way is just looking at the pop reports, looking at those graded reports, getting a sense of how many of how many cards are being graded from each era. I will stand by that as the number one most important thing that has helped me keep my pulse, let's say, on the market over the last 6 years, and sort of was able to predict kind of putting in about $80,000 to $100,000 right as things were sort of taking off, and then kind of sell, nearish to the top, 30 or so % of what I wanted to sell. That was sort of the number one thing that and luck. Let's see what else we got. Yeah, so in terms of like the time horizon for those slabs, it's just so tough. I don't know. It's just going to be something to continue to watch, and I will certainly continue to let people know. And if you want to support me on Patreon, be super grateful. It's I'm so grateful to all those people who are doing that. I will put obviously more specific data, more specific things there, tracking this over time, and I'll, be very transparent and give everyone my best sort of guesses and estimates when certain areas of the market seem to really be drying up, both in terms of cards on the market, which I've talked about before, like which cards we're seeing actually selling, and some months I run through the numbers of how many cards are being listed, how many cards are actually being sold for each set, and then also looking at the pop reports, how many cards are continuing to be graded, and then what percentage of those cards are actually hitting the market. Those are all the data points that you need to kind of get a complete picture. Kareem says market feels stable on the EX era, and DP Platinum, Heart Gold, Soul Silver looking pretty consistent overall. Lots of those sets are naturally lower pop due to short print runs. Yeah, it's there's also not that many sales of a wide variety of cards from those eras, so it's a little bit hard to track. I do think that certainly the level X's and things like that have gone down since their peak. I was selling them pretty high for a while, and a lot of them have definitely gone down, similar to WotC, actually, 30-40%. Some of the really low pop PSA 10 ones, it's there's just so little sales data. It's sort of whatever people are willing to pay. I'm not sure if I could say those have gone down or the overall interest has gone down. I don't think there are a large amount of people right now looking for those in 10s, but the people who want them really want them, and there's just so few. Is my instinct on that era right now. But it's I think the original Nintendo EX era has more people interested in that era than the Heart Gold, Soul Silver. But interesting, the Heart Gold, Soul Silver has less stuff graded, considerably less cards graded. So they kind of are offsetting each other. I know if you had told people 3 years ago that level X's would be selling for more than gold stars, that some of the low pop PSA 10 level X's were selling for more than the PSA 10 gold stars, they would have been no way, that's literally impossible, and I try to take that lesson and apply it to other things in this hobby. I think people get way too caught up in the moment and get way too caught up in what people are way too caught up in prices of the moment, and not nearly as they're not thinking big picture and long term. and they're not thinking sort of long-term supply and demand fundamentals. And that's where I really try and focus my energy. Now, it's much harder because there's nothing modern that has the rarity, like that supply side of Heart Gold, Soul Silver. And part of the reason why I went so heavy into Diamond and Pearl and the Black and White era and bought so many cards from that era was because I saw how rare they were. And so not only was I betting on the fact that I thought that people were underestimating the interest and popularity and long-term popularity of those Pokemon and those generations, which I think people are. I think Gen 1 people are underestimating the modern Pokemon and the fact that people will actually care about and like these Pokemon and enjoy these Pokemon. And when you have 2,000, 3,000 Pokemon potentially someday, these are still going to be like towards the earlier Pokemon and still have a vintage feel. And there are not that many mythical or legendary Pokemon. So I think people underestimate the Pokemon. So I am betting on some of those cards, particularly those Pokemon. But I do think that, and this is that big picture thinking that people aren't really talking about. People are more focused on like the prices day to day. I think more than they should be probably. The issue is that demand. Like nothing in modern I feel nearly as confident about as I felt about like the Heart Gold, Soul Silver era. And this is something, or even to be honest, like the Sun and Moon era, I feel quite a bit more confident about than I feel about the Sword and Shield era. I'm a little bit concerned about the Sword and Shield era. There's just a lot printed, and there's a lot of people investing in it, and a lot of people who I don't think are thinking that much into the future and are not really, have not been doing this long enough. They more sort of are just sort of in that attitude of like, everything always goes up in Pokemon, so it's going to keep going up. And all of that concerns me a little bit. That being said, I still, if I had to, absolutely had to place a bet, and this is also just really hopeful, I hope that all of the Sword and Shield sets go up in price. Both all the sealed product goes up in price, and all of the singles and the graded cards go up in price, because that just means that there's a continued gradual increase in demand. And that is just, I don't even care about the money that much. It just means that the hobby's thriving and people are having a great time. And people are loving and buying this and are able to afford it and enjoy it. And all of the stonking didn't sort of like destroy the era. That's like my worry. Like my fear is that the over hoarding and stonking destroys the specialness and but that can be completely solved if there's a huge amount of people who are going to come in next who haven't yet explored the era, who are then going to buy all these booster boxes and all of these graded cards and all these duplicates that I think a lot of people are hoarding, who aren't necessarily collecting the items but more are looking to flip them at some point in the future. And only time will tell. But I really hope it works out. Posteric says, why are first edition base set cards so cheap right now? Yeah, I mean, they're, I don't know if they're super cheap. I mean, it's tough, but there's good value. I feel like there's pretty much always good value in base set first edition. If you believe in the Pokemon card hobby in the long run, then from the time the Pokemon hobby has started, there's always been really good value in base set first edition. It is the key set. No matter how bored or tired people get of it, everyone's always going to come back around to that. And every collector from every generation who becomes very serious about getting sort of like large, complete collection, it's very likely that they're going to be interested in base set first edition more than any other set, like way more than any other set. Probably. Okay. You're always going to find outliers, but that's going to be the majority of people. And that's people from all generations. The whole argument that like kids today are only going to be interested in like modern Pokemon and not vintage Pokemon, it's just has not been what has happened in every other collectible hobby ever that gets into like the $1 million figures. So again, the high-end comic collectors who are younger are paying huge amounts of money, millions of dollars for like the original Batman, the original Superman. Like these are the comics, that are worth the most. It's not the new ones, right? So I just don't expect that to happen. Now, I do expect modern and particularly your key, like certainly your like a Charizard and some of like the most popular Pokemon of all time that continue to be popular through each generation are always going to have really good value. And but I also think like the key, like the legendary Pokemon in each generation, the mythical Pokemon in each generation, the and then the starters. Like I think that there's going to be collectors when we have so many Pokemon who are going to be focusing in on these types of things. Like there's going to be all sorts of new focuses for people. And I if you really think Pokemon is going to succeed 10 to 20 years, 30 years, and there's going to be more and more interest, I would have a very hard time not seeing that stuff come to fruition. I think that they kind of go hand in hand. Binu says, sorry if this is off topic, but have you discussed the Sorcery Kickstarter yet? I have not. Honestly, I know nothing about it. Is that the one that Rudy was talking about? I'm mixing up all these Kickstarters. There are a lot of different Kickstarters. I really know nothing about it outside of if it's the one that Rudy promoted. I think Rudy gave out some information on it and said some things like it was going to be, there's going to be a bunch of different chase cards. I think it didn't get like 10 times the amount. It got many millions of dollars over what they were asking for. I think it's we'll have to see if people like it, if people want to play it, if a community builds around it. I think people are understandably skeptical of these types of things, but I also think, and this has always been my standpoint, it's great when new card games start. And it'd be great if these new card games succeeded and did well and created fan bases and community. And it doesn't just have to be like Pokemon versus everything else. That being said, that doesn't mean that these companies aren't doing things that could be, that you may not like. That's a whole separate thing. And I think criticisms of these companies based on decisions that they're making or, feeling like they're not catering enough to players or not catering enough to collectors or what have you are reasonable as long as you're making them. I think people take it to an extreme of like, I want it to fail. Like I hate this thing so much that I want it to fail because that would give me a lot of pleasure. That's where you lose me. I don't live in that sort of, I don't really like, it's kind of funny to me almost, that sort of space, but it can be really scary. I mean, and I think part of that comes from people take a personal sort of offense, and the part that I do empathize with, and I guess I do agree with, is when you see people out in the world being successful who you feel like are successful through really unethical means or unscrupulous sort of means, it can be very upsetting to see them succeed when you personally are not succeeding. And when I say succeeding, I mean in this instance like financially succeeding or in terms of popularity or fame or power, succeeding in those sorts of ways. It can be very frustrating to see that. And so I certainly get that and understand that. You just have to kind of, my advice to that, or I guess the advice I give myself, is to just sort of play your own game in life. Try to live life the way that you feel good about, and then figure out how to succeed in that way. And that can be difficult, but if you focus too much on, if there isn't just one way to be financially successful or reasonably financially successful. And although you may never be Logan Paul or monstrously successful, you don't need that type of wealth or that type of fame or that type of thing very likely in order to be like satisfied. There's a much more reasonable, amount, of success that you could find in those areas that could probably make you pretty comfortable and pretty happy. So try not to get too down and try to just kind of make a plan, put one foot in front of the other, and try to build a, career for yourself, a job, a lifestyle for yourself, what have you, that you feel is ethical and good about. You feel good about it. Really, really important, I think. I think too many people are giving up on their own internal. I think a lot of us are feeling a lot of pressure to conform to things that we don't personally believe in in order to get ahead and succeed. And I think that that is unfortunate. I think there's a lot of people who disagree with a lot of what's going on in so many different areas. And instead of learning how to disagree in a respectful way where you sort of, you don't hate the other side or hate people who have different opinions than you or wish bad things, but you just work to kind of create a life around your ethics. I think we've sort of, I think it's a struggle. I think that the deterioration of that is something we need to kind of work against, and maybe each individual person for themselves needs to work against. And I do think a lot of like the toxicity or negativity in like the Pokemon space or just in the internet space in general, like comes from that sort of thing. Deluxe Gaming says, hi, Jake. What are your thoughts on set stamped cards across the board? Pre-release vintage reverse holo Burger King cards. I like them. There's a ton of different ones, and they're all different levels of rarity. So I think you just have to, and it's hard to know what's rare outside of like looking at, you can check on like places like Bulbapedia to see if they happen to have like a distribution number. Some of those some promos do have set distributions or intended distributions that we know about, but most of these cards we really only know based on just pop reports and just the amount that we tend to see on the market. Generally speaking, I think that these are great things to collect. They're great like sets to collect, like collecting like one of every like pre-release stamped card in Pokemon, or a specific type of pre-release stamped card, like a pre-release set card, or every English pre-release set card, from each WotC set or something, and going into then the original EX era and all the way through is just a fun thing. And then you can start collecting it like with the staff stamp when they added the staff stamp for some of them. And there's all sorts of fun things to collect within that. So vintage reverse holos, again, such a broad category, but there's a lot of vintage reverse, legendary collection reverse holos I really like. And the original Nintendo EX era, reverse holos I really like. Now, of course, the market really likes both those too, which is why they're very expensive. So I'm not saying they're like a better deal. They're probably pretty correctly priced at this point. Maybe some of the original Nintendo EX ones, particularly like the less popular Pokemon, I think are probably like a little underpriced, particularly like graded. Like when I can get some of the 9s for like $15 to $20, like, or even $25, like that seems like probably pretty underpriced, like pretty good value. I would say Legendary Collection's pretty expensive. Legendary Collection's one of those sets that's really had a roller coaster, a lot of negativity about Legendary Collections at one point. The booster box is worth a lot, but the individual cards are worth almost nothing. And then it just sort of, outside of, a few of them, particularly the Charizard, and it was always a very hard set to grade in PSA 10, so you always saw premiums for some of the holos and people paying a large amount, and then also some of the Legendary Collection reverse holos I saw people paying quite a bit for, but you've just seen a real shift in opinion on a set like that over time. Just another example of how just be careful with narratives. Let's see. Kelvin Corp says, just keep swimming. A Munger quote says, sometimes the tide is with us, and sometimes it's against us. Just keep swimming. Pokemon investors should listen to someone like Charlie Munger. Has many good advice, yeah. Generally speaking, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger are people who look at the long term, and very similar to what I'm sort of talking about within Pokemon. It's obviously Pokemon versus they're looking at companies. But in Pokemon, I'm doing what they do with companies, right? Which is thinking about the long term. What is this going to look like? How is this going to succeed over the years? And obviously the longer term you go out, the harder it is to predict. And something that, Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett will say a lot is like, we have no idea what is going to happen in the short term, but in the long term, we have our sort of broader market thesis, and that allows us to feel comfortable with the ups and downs of Pokemon. So, for example, if you're very bullish on the long term of Pokemon, the the sort of shorter term up and downs shouldn't impact your overall strategy and your overall idea, of where the market is going to be in the long run. And that's very, very good investing advice in general, certainly in Pokemon, but certainly in the stock market. And that's kind of what this quote is getting at, is that sometimes the tide's with you. Sometimes things are going great and you feel like a genius and you feel like you're getting everything right. And sometimes it's going against you. But oftentimes when you feel like something's going against you or you feel like something is going for you, it really isn't. It's more just the natural ebbs and flows, and you're in it more for the long run as a long-term value investor, if you are one, in whatever you're investing in. And those principles over time it can be really hard, to be honest with you. So, the single biggest holding that I have is like Berkshire and Hathaway stock. And when stocks like Tesla and some of the FANGs and a lot of these really hot stocks, from Peloton to Nvidia there are lots and lots of hot stocks, and someone like Kathy Ark Invest, and when they were doing extremely well, and Berkshire and Hathaway was underperforming the market and had been underperforming the market for about 5 to 6 years, it does wear on you over time. It definitely wears on you. You start to doubt kind of what you're doing, these types of things. But then you see now Berkshire and Hathaway is outperforming in the last year, 8 months or so. Now Berkshire, this is just one example, but Berkshire and Hathaway has so outperformed the S&P 500, and ARK Invest has so underperformed everything that now they were about the same a few months ago, and I don't know right today which one's doing better, but for a while Berkshire was doing better, maybe because Tesla's come back up and some other things have come back up, and Berkshire's gone down a little bit. Maybe they're about the same now. But the point is just that, first of all, there are a lot of different ways to make money, and those were two radically different ways and two radically different temperaments. But it just goes to show you that having a thesis and understanding why you're investing in something also allows you to hold it and to know when to sell it. And because I felt like I understood why I was holding these items and why I'm holding Pokemon items, it allows me to not panic sell. And it will also allow me to know when the time is right to sell if my fundamental thesis changes, these types of things. It's one of these things that you just have to be really careful of people get way too focused on short-term results, and they think way too highly of certain people, like Pikachu's talking about, people can go back and hear my thoughts on Kathy Wood and I obviously I don't know the person at all, but just the people surrounding that sort of thing. We can get pretty sidetracked on all these topics, but it's just fundamentally, you have to invest in things that you really understand. Do not invest in past trends, and do not just invest in people giving you hard sales pitches and telling you what's definitely going to happen. Okay, I'll leave it at that. And I think if Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett here, they would heartily agree and give you some great quotes that they always give. They always summarize things in kind of funny, witty ways. Imposter Oak says, is there a Pokemon set that's more rare than first edition base? Very likely yes, I would say. We don't really know, but I would guess that we have a number of sets that probably rival first edition base. I would say probably the rarest sets are, the sort of original Nintendo EX era sets. There are probably some that are a little bit rarer than others for sure, but overall, that whole era could be rarer than first edition base or similarly rare to first edition base. Your E-Series boxes could be similarly rare. Your first edition Neo boxes could be similarly as rare. Your Legendary collection could be similarly as rare or rarer. Things like the Diamond and Pearl era, and a lot of the booster boxes and sets from that era could be similarly as rare or even rarer than first edition base. These are things we just don't know. Rainy Day says, Jake told me that he secretly idolizes Kathy Wood and Tai Lopez. Yeah, Sakila and I have had during all the craziness the last 2 years, there were so many nights, like at least like 10 nights, I think, that you and I stayed up 3-4 hours into the night just trying to keep each other sane with all of the craziness in the stock market and the Pokemon market and the collectibles market, and just trying to be like, why are people listening? What is compelling about these people and this advice and this information? And yeah, it's I'm thankful for those conversations. I feel like we're in a calmer place of sorts now. I'm not as concerned about, yeah. And I've lost a lot of money many times in the stock market. My portfolio has gone down 40% in value, and I have a fairly conservative portfolio. And my portfolio has gone down over 40% 3 times in my life since I started investing when I was like 6 years old. My dad got me to investing because he's a financial advisor, and just like, always talked about stocks around me, and it's such a passion of his that it just sort of became, a passion or an interest of mine as well over time. And yeah, it's you do get used to it. Like, the more you go through it, the more you get used to it. But it's tough. There were months this year where, yeah, I won't go into like the sums that I made and lost, but it's pretty wild. And it's crazy when you lose or make such huge sums of money versus the amount of money that like you're making at your day job. And when those things are so different, when you can like make or lose as much money or more money than you make in an entire year in a day, it's pretty crazy. Emotionally it becomes something difficult to deal with. I mean, and my dad has always said this to me. I think it's a big reason why people get financial advisors, is so they don't have to deal with that. It's not even that necessarily the financial advisor is going to do like, outperform the market by so much or at all, just by putting it in index funds or whatever. But it's like the peace of mind and knowing that you have someone who's actively managing it and dealing with that, so you don't have to stress. Imposter Oak says, at Retrograde, how do we get him to answer questions? You just ask your questions and I go through them. I think I just answered one of your questions before. So I for people who like have wondered like, how do I pick questions, I literally just go in order from the top, and I'm sure I miss things. I try not to skip any questions, but there's just like a lot of text, and I'm not intentionally skipping you if I do skip something. Pikachu says, Jake, so I'm going to respond to one comment. I'm actually reading the top of the chat and the bottom of the chat at the same time, 2 different things. But Retrograde says, you have to just pretend it's Monopoly money or just don't look. So the way I deal with it is thinking in the long term. I ask myself, just to go back to what we were talking about before, I ask myself, do I still believe in my long-term thesis? And if I do, then if I have more money, now's the time to buy the dip, which is the common saying now. But it's true. Fundamentally, that is correct. And there are times when I will buy more of something. I'll sell something that's higher and buy more of something but you have to be careful that you're not chasing, throwing good money after bad money, right? So this is all stuff I covered in early videos on my channel. Okay, let's get to Pikachu's question. Jake, pretty granular question here. Do you know if there's a difference in the World Hobby Fair Mewtwo art versus the Korokoro version? If not, how, why does PSA have a separate label? My guess would be potentially there's a gloss difference. I don't know offhand. This would be a great question to like ask on E4 to, you know, a guy like Choke or something there. You know, a very specific niche question like that. I do not know. Thank you for the cool question, though. Have you looked it up? Have you tried Bulbapedia and E4? That's where I would go. Sure. Let's see. Ninja says, Yo, just stopping by to say hi, keep collecting, and always remember, have fun. Absolutely. This is definitely a fun hobby for me, and definitely a place where I just like let off a lot of steam and just get to do something I enjoy. Neo21803, after doing some quick searching on CGC pop reports, it looks like almost all vintage/semi-vintage black and white and before pristine 10s are without subgrades. Thoughts on CGC reliability? I don't. It's interesting. I really don't have any thoughts on CGC reliability. These will be interesting things over time to look at as more and more CGC cards are graded. If I get a bunch of CGC, like I think I have like a few 10s that I bought, but most of the cards I bought are like 9.5s. And it'll be interesting to compare them over time and to see, you know, how, you know, it can be hard to separate fact from fiction. And conspiracy, like kind of crazy tinfoily hat conspiracy theory to like valid concerns. You know, it's a tough thing to piece out. And I think you can go too far both ways. I see certain people shutting down conversation and debate, and then I see other people, I think, from my perspective, making claims or kind of not your comment here at all. Please don't take it that way. But more, you know, just online, you know, what I'll randomly see. Just, you know, people like very, like really believing that like all of these, you know, yeah, companies have it out for them, and you know, I don't know, all sorts of things. Let's see. Over the Brick says, I see you have the new shelves up. What are we looking at? Yeah, I have 4 of these shelves going now. You can see sort of 3 of them. This one has some of the PSA cards I need to look through and actually sort and put into inventory. So these are all filled with slabs. I have a lot of work to do, but it's really fun work. I really enjoy sorting and putting stuff into spreadsheets and meeting collection goals, and then also figuring out like what can be decent inventory and what I'm going to do with it. And I enjoy like all the parts of it. But yeah, the other 2 shelves have been up for a while, and it's just sort of some of my sealed product from various different collectibles that I like to collect. I just got these in. These One Piece cards. Not sure if anyone has ever seen these before. They're kind of cool. Come from these. I like One Piece too. I'm a big fan of like a lot of different animes, so I collect. So I'm kind of starting to collect those. I'm gonna start grading lots of different things, and I think that I'll just put it simply that I think that there's a lot of potential in a lot of different graded card markets that has not been tapped yet. And these markets just have not been built or created yet. And there's potential in a lot of these markets and a lot of these vintage cards. And we've already seen that come to fruition in many different, you know, obviously Marvel, you know, has exploded with their PMGs, but there's a lot of things that I think have potential, and some pretty decent rarity to them that people are not just aware of. Let's see. Oh no, My computer's freezing. Oop, just froze for a second. Oh boy. It just froze and pushed me to the beginning. Now I gotta find where we were. I'm sorry. I can find it though. Okay, here we are. Imposter Oak says, is now a good time to buy first edition base set cards? I think it's a reasonable time to buy. If you have the money, this is my personal opinion, just my opinion. If you have the money and you are interested in that era and you really want those cards, I think now is a perfectly reasonable time to start picking those up. I would be patient. Obviously, you want to try to buy under market, try to buy in auctions. That's personally what I would do. Would I be hardcore, like, investing, thinking that they're going to, like, 10x in value over the next, like, 5 to 10 years? No. I think it's pretty unlikely, not impossible. I don't think it's impossible. I think we could see explosive growth again in a 10-year time horizon. I think it's definitely possible. Given just how much, like, how cheap these things are as compared to, like, sports cars or some of these other hobbies. Just the market caps are so low. That I do think that, in Patreon, we went over market caps, I think 2 months ago. I think we had Pat Flynn last month, but 2 months ago, and, really trying to demonstrate how low the market caps are in Pokemon compared to sports. For those who don't know, a market cap is just the amount of overall money, like the market cap of I'll just pull a random card I have here. The market cap of this card would be the entire market cap of, like, graded Blastoise, Team Rocket, Japanese cards would be, like, the value of every single graded card added up would be the market cap. Obviously, the market cap of this card in the world would be much, much larger, and no one has any idea because we have no idea how many copies are out there. But we can figure out the current market cap of a current graded card. Of course, it's constantly changing because more of those cards are being graded, but we can get an idea. One of the interesting, like, things that I showed in that is just the size of, like, the Michael Jordan being larger than the Michael Jordan, like, 1986 Fleer rookie card, which is, like, the key Michael Jordan card outside of, serialized or just very, very low printed autographed type, special inserts. That card having, like, a higher market cap than, like, the top, like, few hundred Pokemon cards combined. Getting some compliments on the room. Appreciate that, Ancient Mew and others. Apple says, hey, Jake, thank you for being here for us in these crazy times. Thank you for being here for me as well, Apples, and just hanging out and everyone being here. It's, we'll all support each other together and, keep each other sane together and keep each other just, like, having fun and enjoying what we like, right? But I certainly care about others, and I feel cared about by others in this space, in this community. So I'm very appreciative of that. Pac-Man says, sometimes it's good to take a moment to appreciate where the hobby is right now. Never could have expected this level of growth in Pokemon cards or sports cards. Yeah, I certainly did not expect it this quick. That is for sure. I will say that I and I have old posts and different sorts of things where I couldn't believe at how cheap Pokemon cards were a few years ago when I got into it. I've been in it now 6 years, but 5 or so years ago when I was sort of really thinking about it and doing my research on the size of the Pokemon company and just that it was, by a large scale, sort of the number one, pop culture phenomenon in the world, um, in terms of the value of the company and the amount of money the company was making on merchandise and cards and video games and movies and all their different revenue streams. And just the fact that when I looked at these cards, the nostalgia hit, the way that I felt about them, and I just imagined so many people were going to rediscover them. And but I never, so I did think that these would be excellent investments and were extremely, extremely undervalued years ago, but I never expected them to grow this quickly, this fast. That is for sure. Who knows how long it would have taken or how right I would have been if it hadn't been for the pandemic, or Logan Paul or other influencers. I just don't know the answer to that. I think that it would have probably grown over time. I think that something like this can't just happen with influencers. People also have to really like the thing and be connected with the thing. It has to be both. And I think that the fundamentals and people's lifetime connections and love of this stuff was what, really set it off, was sort of the kindling. If the pandemic and the inflation and all the extra money and people having so much extra time to spend at home and looking for more like indoor online hobbies, if all of that was the match, so. But yeah, it's definitely good, and I think that I certainly over the last 2 years there have been plenty of times where I was so concerned for people losing money and just concerned for like the health of the hobby and concerned for just the state of sort of the discourse at times, that I would always come back to Pac-Man as like trying to reflect and remind myself that like it's still such a great hobby, it's still really fun, and all of this is still good for the hobby. Like at the end of the day, even with all of the negativity and the gatekeeping and the anger and and my bad behavior and other people's bad behavior, like with all of that, even with all of that, like this period has still been a net good and a net positive for sure. Like way net positive. And so it's also why when people ask me like my opinions on like Logan Paul, has Logan Paul been good for the hobby and all these things, like the honest answer is yes, right? And influencers becoming engaged and just putting a lot more attention on it has been really good for the hobby, because it's brought. Now I think that it's up to a lot of us here to create spaces and help be good citizens of the hobby. But I do think that there are certain things that none of us can do that someone like Logan Paul or some of these big people, with their reach and with the amount of eyes and attention that they can bring onto something, and there's really something to be said about the value of that, even if it's done by someone who maybe has questionable ethics or questionable integrity, questionable character, those types of things. And Polaris2694 says, if Pokemon releases a set this year that's a complete dud, like Steam Siege was, do you think that would shake out a lot of newcomers, or do you think Pokemon has too much momentum now? I think that it wouldn't shake out a lot of the collectors. I think collectors, I mean, like even sets like Steam Siege, or I think some of these sets were actually like, and people may definitely disagree with us, and it's fine, but yes, they became a bit of a meme and a bit of a talking point, but like as a collectible set, there are plenty of like cool collectible cards in Steam Siege. You have multiple really good rainbow rares. Oh no, wait, I'm thinking of Crimson Invasion. Sorry, sometimes I mix up XY Steam Siege and Crimson Invasion in my head because they're both like were hated on largely. I was thinking of Crimson Invasion there. Sorry, Steam Siege is X and Y. Crimson Invasion is Sun and Moon. Either way, there's still cards in these sets that these Battle Styles is a good example that they're still really beautiful, strong alternate arts in those sets and rainbow rares and chase cards and popular Pokemon in every set. And I do think that people get I think the collectors generally, I mean, yes, they might skip certain sets, but I honestly think a lot of them more skip the really high demand sets, really expensive sets, than they would skip because like if I could just as a pure experience, if I wasn't thinking about money at all and money didn't matter to me at all, would I rather open Battle Styles at like $70 or Evolving Skies at like $180 or something, $170? I'd probably just rather open Battle Styles. I mean, I want to open both. I don't know. And I guess it depends on like how much money I have at the time. But I think that yeah, I think that, let's see, how do I want to phrase it? I think that it's hard to know if we return to a period where booster boxes are not going up in value at all, like what happened in the Sun and Moon era and the X and Y era for about 5 years or something, where if you bought a booster box and you tried to resell it, you would 100% lose money no matter which booster box. This was every single booster box during those eras. Not early XY, but sort of later XY after they started printing a lot more. You would have lost money after shipping and fees and sales tax on any box that you bought. Pretty much. I mean, maybe you could make $5 here and there, but for the most part, you would have lost on everything outside of like a very short period of like Roaring Skies before Roaring Skies got a reprint. For those who don't know the story, Roaring Skies had like Shaman EX, and then that was an extremely playable card. They didn't print enough of it. People really wanted that card. Those boxes went up. I think they went up maybe to $400 or something, and then came crashing back down after they reprinted a bunch of it, something like that. Maybe it was only $250. I can't remember now. But if we enter a period like that, where there really is no money to be made at all. Like, I do wonder what happens to a lot of this modern sealed product. Like, does Pokemon just start printing a lot less? How many people are just holding these boxes? What happens to a lot of these booster box breaking channels? What happens to some of these LGSs, particularly like the smaller LGSs who are newer, who don't have as good of distribution deals, don't get as much product? It is going to put pressure on a lot of those people, a lot of those businesses, and a lot of those individuals, and Pokemon as a company to figure out sort of what to do with that and how to change the print runs, hopefully. So it's interesting stuff to think about, I think. But Polaris, like one of the major way to create momentum is just to shorter print sets. Like if Pokemon halved, like they could take a really bad set and just not print that much of it, and it would go up a huge amount. Because there's so many sealed collectors, and there's so many people who just want rare sealed stuff, or fairly rare sealed stuff. Is wrestling about to take off again with Logan? I don't know. Thanks for being here, La. Thanks for the kind message. Imposter Oak says, Jake, what Sun and Moon Rainbow Rares are you picking up right now? Some of them I was just picking up that were just on what I felt were really good deals. Sort of all of them, depending on price. Everything sort of has a price point for me. I do a lot of research on the different sets, on how much I think was printed of each set, which ones I think got bigger reprints, which ones less, and then just going after some popular Pokemon that I think are a little bit underpriced. And then I just saw a decent amount of the Rainbow Rares I just bought were just for my pure collection that I don't think were good like investment buys necessarily, but I was able to get some of them in, some I bought some PSA 10s off of PWCC at about 60% or so of what the last sold on eBay, and I just wanted to add them to my collection. Whether they go up and down, I don't really care. Like I bought the Mew and the Mewtwo, the Snorlax and the Eevee, some of like the Team Up and the Unified Minds, and some of those ones are definitely the most expensive by a large margin. Outside of the Burning Shadows, Rainbow Red Charizard, and like the Lugia and the Rayquaza are the other three that are quite expensive. But yeah, some of those Team Up ones. Tyranitar's fairly expensive. What else is expensive? The Mewtwo is reasonably expensive from Shining Legends. We're talking certainly over, a few $100 or, in PSA 10, or at least $100 plus for sure. The thing about me, like Imposter Oak, is that I like all the eras and I plan on collecting all eras. It's just a matter of like picking the right time. So I tend to move from different eras when I think it's a reasonably good time to buy that era based on the population report data that I'm seeing and the prices, and I just sort of take my best educated guesses. Killian says, "Hi Jake, I saw you bought Bandai Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Can you tell us more about it? Do you think it has good potential?" I really like those cards. I think they're really cool. A lot of it is a demand issue. So there are two issues with them. One is a demand issue. They're definitely not that popular. I do think that people tend to have good reactions to them from my experience, and when you show them, people like them. They obviously have so much less popularity than like the English side. They have not done, we saw sort of what happened with like, Topsoon and Bandai Cardass and Pokemon and Meiji and, some of these sort of non-TCG. Now, the Bandai ones for Yu-Gi-Oh! Are actually a TCG, but it's not the Konami TCG, so it's sort of like the non-WotC TCG Pokemon, kind of similar to this stuff. I think that they have similarities. And also came before, similar to like Topson and Bandai, coming before. Certainly the game was released in English, and around the same time as it was released in Japan, the original base set. I think that I'm surprised they're not more popular and more in demand. I think that they could become over time. They have gone up in price quite a bit. When I first started going after them, like so much other things, they were definitely cheaper. They've definitely gone up quite a bit, particularly your key cards. I mean, there are people paying a few $1,000s for some of the cards, and there are some promos that are very rare that go with that set that are $10,000 if you found them in like a PSA 10 quality, like a really, really strong card. A couple data points about them. So I've talked with some Japanese sellers. I talked with a guy who has graded probably the vast majority of the population report himself, because he had a bunch of sealed product that he opened and started grading and then selling through CGC, which is how it all started. Like that was basically introduced to the Western market in large part through selling through CGC. That is what popularized those. And that's where most of CGC, I keep saying CGC, I'm sorry, PWCC, selling through PWCC. That is where most of those graded ones have actually been sold and were sold in the beginning. And they continue to sell there, and they're not that expensive. Again, some of the keyer cards are quite expensive, but the base cards are not that expensive. They are very hard to grade. so from talking to this guy, he said he graded a ton of them, and about 8% of them came back PSA 10 fresh out of pack. 8% came back PSA 10. And the holos are even harder to grade. That's what he told me. And from my experience grading these cards, I bought maybe 3,000 of these cards, and I was able to grade maybe 25 of them. And I have gotten 0 10s myself. All the 10s that I own, I bought. So take that for what it's worth. Is there a lot more of this mint in Japan somewhere? And if prices really skyrocketed, would we see a lot more of it come out? Certainly could. I don't know the answer to that. One of these Japanese sellers that I talked to, I trust him to some extent, but I also think he's businessman. I do feel like he maybe exaggerates potentially a little bit sometimes, and I do wonder if he also exaggerates the rarity of items a little bit sometimes, and he asks very high prices on things sometimes, and I don't know. So take that for what it's worth, but I can tell you my personal experience, and hopefully that's helpful. And for those who don't know what we're talking about right now, we're talking about these guys. And I just got a few back in a return that I sent out with James from Z&G Emporia. All right. Dark Law Blizzard says, which Magikarp do you prefer? The Unicarp, the Fan Club Carp, or good old Shining Magikarp? Oof, they're all great. Just as a card itself, I prefer the good old Shining Magikarp. For the rarity and for the story behind it, I like the Unicarp release and the story. Like, I think the story of how that was distributed and the time period in Pokemon, it's the coolest. And then the Fan Club is like second place for both of those. It has the second best art, and I think that the Unicarp is not particularly very good art, and it's not a holo, and it's a reprinted art. Like, for me, the coolness is just the story of it. In terms of rarity, there's said to be about 1,000 of the Unicarp. We have no idea how many of the Fan Club Carp there are, and certainly there are a lot more than 1,000 of just regular good old Shining Magikarp, even though it's very hard to pull. The Japanese one is very difficult to pull from those packs. It's part of why the Japanese Shining Magikarp really gets a premium over just the English Unlimited. Quinlan Collectible says at Pokenomics, I feel like people only consider the upward pressure in the social aspect of the hobby of people pumping their bags, but don't consider the downward pressure of people not wanting to create competition for themselves, and so they don't talk about things they feel are undervalued that they are buying. Let's see. I feel like people only consider the upward pressure in the social aspect of the hobby of people pumping their bags, but don't consider the downward pressure of people not wanting to create competition for themselves. So I think I understand what you're saying here. So you're saying that because I don't want to create competition for myself on certain cards that I'm buying, that can create downward pressure on the overall market because it makes it seem like or you're not talking specifically about me necessarily here, but just in general, people are not talking about things that they're buying a lot because they're not trying to create pressure for themselves. And so it's easier to talk about negatives or broader negatives without creating competition for yourself. So maybe that creates some sort of like downward pressure. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I think that's probably true to some extent. I think you also have lots and lots of channels. I do think it's interesting that, like, I think most of this, just from what I see, most of the modern channels that I see are telling people pretty actively to buy very specific things. So now you're going to have channels like Danny Phantom, Squeaks, and others, and plenty of others, I'm sure. So don't take offense if you do mostly modern. And Squeaks and Danny don't do all modern for sure, and Squeaks has probably quite a bit of vintage. But Squeaks, for example, or Danny will give you like a lot of really good info, and then kind of like leave you to they might give certain opinions somewhere, but I think they generally just give a lot of info and then leave the decisions up to people. They're not necessarily like telling people more specifically what to buy. There are a lot of like top 5 things to invest in right now videos that are specifically telling you these are the 5 things to buy. And I do think those tend to be more of your modern items. And to be fair, they tend to be very, very mass-produced items. And so I also think those videos are not as problematic, maybe. Like if I come out and I like pump like a very, very niche card that people haven't heard a lot about, and I say it's like a really great investment, and like 5,000 people watch the video, and even 15 to 20 people who have quite a bit of money decide to like buy a decent amount of that, it could greatly impact that market. It's going to be much harder to I bought a bunch of these, right? Because I like Sun and Moon. This has, your Umbreon, your Espeon, Lapras, and a number of other really good rainbow rares. It was reprinted, so it became very cheap. I was able to get a fair bit of them for about $33, I think, a piece, because I bought quite a few. And that just seemed like a great deal on a set that was pretty old, that had a lot of cards that I really like. And I really like the art, and I like Solgaleo. I do have some Lunala boxes too. Me talking about that or showing this example, there's so many channels who probably told you to buy this, who had this as one of the best buys, or had the UPC as one of the best buys. Those things I feel like aren't that dangerous really to talk about or detrimental to talk about, because there's so much of this product still, and they're maybe a little bit more I don't know what quite the right word is. Obvious is not quite the right word, because you do have to have knowledge and skill, but a little bit more, I guess obvious in the sense that it's like, it's just been reprinted a lot and the value is very low. So versus a very like a niche Japanese, promo card, or even a non-Pokemon thing that not that many people know about. Let's see. And it is true, Quinlan, that part of the reason I don't like talking about specific things is I don't want to create pressure for myself. But honestly, the two main reasons is I don't want people to be buying specific thing. I don't think that people should listen to I think we should be teaching a man to fish. We should be giving data, and we should be making interesting, broad arguments. I think that that's the best content. I think that that's the most helpful and useful content in the long run. And I feel like me coming out and saying buy these 3 things is dangerous, because people might buy them without actually really knowing the risk or knowing why they're buying them. And then if they're wrong, they did something. Now, is it their responsibility because they listened to some guy on YouTube without doing their own research? Sure, to some degree. But at the same time, I feel bad. I feel guilty about that. That doesn't feel very ethical to me. Whereas if I give someone a lot of really good information that they didn't have or they didn't know, that feels like I'm really helping them, for sure. So, and then I also don't want to manipulate cards that I own a lot of, and, or manipulate's not a fair word, because I'm not intentionally doing anything, but I don't want to impact temporarily or whatever, have impact on cards that I own. And it's hard to know the effect. Clearly, items that are rarer, I could have more of an impact on, right, by talking about them. Cards that are not very rare, that are extremely common, it's unlikely a channel my size or any channel is going to have too much of an impact. So I think I worry less about having a broad impact on the market and more about having a negative impact on each individual person here. Hopefully that makes sense to people. Like, I don't want you to hear me and then what I'm saying have a negative impact on you. I'm less worried about you then doing something that's going to, like, you know, manipulate the market or that sort of thing. Okay. So we're going to do about 45 more minutes tonight. All right. So I'm going to try to go through the top middle here for another 15 minutes or so, and then I probably will jump to the bottom and try to grab some later questions. All right. Really appreciate all the great questions tonight, as always, all the interaction. Do you prefer list view or grid view on eBay searches? I prefer list. How about you? Bino asks. It's a funny question. Lord Pokebloke says, how much stonk could a Pokestonker stonk if a Pokestonker could stonk Pokemon? Quite a bit, I imagine. Games Law Politics says, oh, there was a buyout on the Latios and TCG player that you were talking about earlier. Interesting. So it's gone up quite a bit. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, here's the truth, right? It doesn't matter what I think. It's supply and demand at the end of the day. And so if people have the money and the demand is there and the interest is there and a card is not printed that much, then just because I don't like a card or because I think the card is way overvalued doesn't mean that it won't go up a lot in price. You know, it's just math at the end of the day. It's why it's best to focus on the math and the arguments and you know, we as a collector, of course, you're going to be buying things that you actually like. And I don't do this ever fundamentally as a business or an investor. So, you know, I would never, even if I thought that those were going to continue to go up for some reason, I would never, ever buy that card. You know, I wouldn't buy that card at $50 to $100, let alone $400 for me personally. It's just not a card that I like. But, you know, there's so many cooler alternate arts, but, you know, as far just subjectively, but, you know, as far as from a, like, I think we're in a time period right now where I hear a lot of people saying alternate arts are going to be like a humongous thing going forward. And hey guys, like, and this I agree with, you know, oh, the first alternate arts were actually like, you know, in some of these like late sun and moon sets, and they were actually like pretty rare and pretty hard. And some of them were kind of difficult to grade. And maybe these are pretty undervalued as compared to some of like the Sword and Shield alternate arts. And I actually tend to agree with that. With that general idea, I do think that some of those are actually undervalued as compared to the Sword and Shield. I just kind of think it's all overvalued, if I'm being completely honest, as compared to other things. But I could end up being very wrong on that. Again, you know, I was buying, and we're in a very different time in Pokemon, so please take this the right way. But you know, I'm a very conservative person. Me buying something at like $400, $500, $600. That's brand new that I have, or fairly new, and particularly we're talking about like alternate arts from like the newest sets in PSA 10, when I know that so many more of those cards are going to be graded in the future, and I think that right now is probably the height of their popularity in my personal opinion, and they're probably going to die down in popularity during the next generation, because the next generation will have some other new thing that people will be into. Like, that would be the time I would go back. And it's just like Hidden Fates right now. Like, baby shinies and full art shinies, like, people are bored of them. People have seen them for so much. Like, now is a good time to buy those. If you had bought those in the middle of the hype, like, right now is the middle of the hype for alternate arts, in my opinion, you know, you run into that issue there. Now, are alternate arts, like, much better than, like, the Shiny Vault? Maybe. And maybe it goes down as, because they're so beautiful, because they're art pieces, because, you know, these is what people say, because they're, you know, I have mixed feelings about some of them. You know, I also think some of the downside is that they're not very set-like. They're also different, that they don't, I don't know if they trigger collect them all or collectability or completion. I don't know. I have mixed thoughts on them, but I really like them. I plan on owning them all if they drop to a certain price. And if not, I'll sort of just move on to the next thing. Pokemon will have no shortage of cool things, I think, in the future. But I hope my point there is clear. And but at the end of the day, I could be completely wrong in the sense that the market may just disagree. The market may say we love these things. They are very difficult to pull, particularly from sets that have a number of different alternate arts. Like, they're very hard to pull. We love these things. They're hard to grade, and we think they should be worth thousands of dollars, in 5 to 10 years. And it is what it is. I just think that there's quite a bit of, and again, this was the point I was going to make. When I was buying those level X's at like $15 to $20, my downside risk was so small, and my upside potential was so huge. When you're buying in at $400, $500, you might have some upside potential, but I also think you have so much more downside risk. And versus you can buy these rainbow rares, some of them for $15, $20, $30 that have the same rarity in sets that were printed less. I don't know. Do you really think that the alternate arts are that much better than the rainbow rares in the long run? And we have some people, who hate, they're such a fiery anger, and they hate rainbow rares so much, and they love alternate art so much. And on some level, it's like, I appreciate and respect your passion. I just don't feel that way about the cards, and I'm not sure I believe that in the long run, I think people will want to collect everything. So that's my take. Philippe, we got a question before that, and then I'll grab you, Philippe. Story of Brian says, recently a PSA 10 Holo Steelix from Aquapolis sold for $590 on auction, and a PSA 10 Alt Charizard from Brilliant Stars sold for $620. Do you think this price is justified for each of them? I certainly would much rather, as both a collector and I think as an investor, own the Steelix. The upside for the other one is that it's a Charizard, but again, Brilliant Stars just came out. It's much cheaper. I wonder how much cheaper it would be to pull and grade and get a PSA 10 Alt Art Charizard than the Holo Steelix. I imagine it's much, much, much cheaper. Even though it might be harder to pull the Charizard than the Steelix would be one out of every 100-ish packs basically to pull it. I'm not sure what the odds of pulling the Charizard. I'm sure quite a bit more difficult than one every 100 packs, but it's probably maybe it's about the same to get a 10. But if you think about how expensive each pack is, I would think that it would be much cheaper to pull that Charizard. Now, the other thing is that built into that Charizard is that $150 grading price that someone probably paid to send it in, and the fact that so few people are sending those in right now because they don't want to spend that $150 grading price, one, and two, a lot of that product is still going to be opened. A lot more of that product will be opened now and in the future than will Aquapolis. So for all those reasons, I would choose the Steelix. Now, you might just say, well, it's Charizard, and Charizard's going to go up more, and people are going to care more about Charizard over time, and people are going to care more about alternate arts over time, and nothing is a sure thing in the world, in this game. And there is some, but that would be my guess. And certainly as a collector, I would much rather own, I'd much rather own a raw, not pay for $620 for a PSA 10. I mean, how much are the Alt Art Charizards? It's $100, maybe $150. I don't know. Maybe they're quite a bit more, but I certainly wouldn't be wanting to pay for a huge premium for a 10 of that. Whereas paying for a large premium of a 10 or an Aquapolis card, you can get a Steelix scratched up holo pretty easily, but from Aquapolis for not that much money. But to get a, pristine PSA 10 quality one is going to be very difficult, and cost you a lot of money if you try to crack packs, or to find one ungraded is going to be very hard. So that's the way that I look at those two cards. Yeah, Squeaks is making some good points. I'm reading the bottom of the chat too about those sun and moon ones. There's so many examples, and when you've been doing this as long as Squeaks has, or even as long as I have, not as long as Squeaks, but there are just so many examples of opinions changing and shifting, and narratives being created, and then narratives being destroyed, and then narrative shifting, and it's better to. You don't want to be at the end of the narrative. You don't want to be buying in at the top of the narrative hype. You want to be thinking about what's the next narrative, and or just ignoring the narratives and buying, the stuff that's just always been quality, the stuff, so I don't know. It's important to understand, though. Philip D'Souza says, Pokenomics, is there a threshold where the data/market takes over enjoyment? Is it necessary to pick one side of the fence? That's definitely just a very personal question. I don't think you should. I think that if you feel like thinking about the money all the time can be tiring and exhausting and stressful, as well as also being fun. But it can be all of those things. One, because it takes a lot of thought, and it can be a lot of data and can be very complicated. Arguing can be tiring, right? So if you're debating people all the time and you're arguing, like, that can be both fun but also exhausting. So both of those things can cause some burnout where you maybe want to break from all of that. I definitely don't find that it takes enjoyment away. It way more adds enjoyment for me and adds another element that I really enjoy. I will say I did make a video, which I didn't release, talking about my frustration with all the money talk earlier on in last year, because it felt a little bit hypocritical, because I have a channel where we talk a lot about the market, but there was a period where it was so much, and it was so much stonking, and it didn't feel like it was very theoretical, philosophy-ish, kind of broader market principle type talk. It was more like, what should I buy that's going to make me the most money? Just getting those questions over and over again and having those conversations over and over again. And with people who I didn't feel like were necessarily really maybe enjoyed Pokemon in the way that I did, in the sense that they didn't necessarily have like these cards, and again, this is not a gatekeeping comment, it's just for me personally, these cards, I have a personal connection to them from my life. If none of you guys were here and none of you guys like this stuff, I would still be collecting these cards and building these sets and enjoying this, and I'd just be able to get it for super cheap, and I wouldn't get to enjoy all of the market analysis and all of the fun hanging out and all that stuff. I definitely, there would be some pluses, but there would also be those definite significant negatives. But because of that, when I was running into a lot more people over the last 2 years who I didn't feel like felt that way about it, those interactions were not as rewarding. Let me put it that way. And so because of that, those reactions would burn me out a little bit. Those interactions would burn me out a little bit at times. But when I'm talking market finance stuff with Squeaks, who's in the chat, or someone like that, I think he and I probably could talk for 10 hours in a row and just have more energy. We'd probably be exhausted from thinking so much and talking, but we could just talk forever with people who are similarly passionate, really love the history and the knowledge, also really love the market side, also really love the collecting side, and just kind of combine all of that together. So, hopefully you leave these streams feeling excited about the hobby and happy and looking, for your next purchase to buy, or with some good, some information, or maybe a little bit more grounded in these are the goals I want to set, and I'm not going to overspend, and I'm going to, take my time, and that's what I hope, and not that these conversations leave people more burnt out. But if you are burnt out from the financial stuff, there's nothing to panic about that either. I think it's perfectly fine to come in and out of hobbies, and enjoy hobbies for a while and then pick up a new hobby and maybe come back to that hobby in the future. And although it can suck to see people leave who are like part of a community or part of, your sort of people who you're every day interacting with, that can feel like a loss. For example, like Squeak's making less video content, he's here, or like Swami stopping his channel. Like it sucked that Swami stopped his channel. Like I used to look forward to Swami's videos. Like Swami's like guru guide to guruing and like his comedy videos, like I would look forward to those. And the fact that he like was kind of burnt out on making that content was like, it sucked for me. You know what I mean? But like at the end of the day, like it's really important for people to take care of themselves. And when you care about someone, you're able to be supportive, right? Of them and making decisions that are best for them, for themselves. So some thoughts. Justin Pan says, "Hey Jake, what's the deal with the CD promos art in terms of how it's perceived in the U.S.? I heard King Pokey was selling heads of them in PSA 10 on TV over there. Is that true? And does that cheapen the card?" Yeah, so back in the day, so the CD promo, there are tons of those printed, very common cards. They're also very iconic arts, right? The style of the art is the style of the art on the Game Boy games and the booster boxes and they're really cool looking cards and they look great together as a set, in my opinion. So you just have really high demand and popularity mixed with a lot of those cards. Now, before this huge surge and increase in demand, those cards were, I'm trying to remember prices on them. I want to say the Charizards were in PSA 10 were about $100, something like that. And what are they selling now? 400 maybe would be my guess without looking right now. I'm not following them specifically, but if we think that that's what they did, that's about in line with what most of Wizards of the Coast has done in terms of about 4xing. So I don't think that they're a crazy huge outlier. You just have to keep in mind that the only way that something like that was able to reach that $400 price point, given how many of those there are and how many are still sealed. I mean, people are still opening them up and grading them. I just graded another one this week. I still have some to grade. Just understanding that. But the art's really cool. It's iconic. It's a holo Charizard, and it's vintage, and it just, in all the other areas, it's just a plus, I think. So those are some of my thoughts on that. I definitely don't think like Gary selling them many years ago, many of them, did anything to them. They're just a fairly common card. How many of those are printed? I probably have heard, like, I'm trying to remember if I've ever heard like any sort of numbers on that. If anyone in the chat happens to know, feel free to share. But it's a large amount of those were expected to be printed. Let's see. Mason. A big number of these Kickstarter games have no idea what they're doing. I've also seen some of these like grading companies starting to pop up, like even smaller grading companies that I even feel more that way about, Mason, of just like how, like, it's like, yes, like creating a card game and then getting in with like distributors and LGSs and learn and like understanding how to do all of that. I also think with like these card companies, like how is anyone supposed to trust you that like what you're doing or you're going to be able to do this well? And it's like there's some people starting grading companies like in their kitchens right now. Yeah, it's on the one hand, let me take a step back and say, like, I respect and appreciate the wanting to create a business and create a hustle and do something. On the other hand, I would just encourage you to reflect on, like, that is not a good, like, that just seems like a terrible terrible business model. I mean, it's one thing, like, if you're Ace Grading, right? If you're Randolph and you want to create a grading company, or you're PokeRev or you're Leonhardt and you have a huge platform and you have a decent amount of credibility and people who are going to follow you and believe in you and all these types of things, like even for them, it's going to be extremely difficult. It's an uphill battle to really, I think, probably to succeed, and let alone challenge, or get in the same realm as PSA or CGC or Beckett, grading companies that have just been around for a really long time. Yeah, to not have that type of fan base, or credibility, or I just don't know how you're expecting to get there. Like if I was in that business and they put me in charge of like marketing, like I would be, and I get reached out. So they do exactly what I would tell them to do, which is like reach out to a bunch of channels my size, basically, channels where there's a, solid engaged, 3,000 to 5,000 person base who watches most videos, that type of thing. And try to get, in there and then kind of work your way up. But yeah, it's just going to be such an uphill battle. We got a super chat here from GDF. Appreciate that. Say, hey, Pickonomics, I'd appreciate your investment opinion on these 4 Charizard cards. Okay, I will do my best. First edition, Shadowless, base set 2. Thank you. So without knowing the exact prices of all of these things and exactly what you're talking about here, I'll just give you my overview. Okay, so first of all, all of these cards are probably fairly investable if you think Pokemon is going to do well in the future. It really all has to do with price point. Now, which ones do I think have the most potential upside? I would say the most potential upside are Shadowless and First Edition Shadowless because of rarity. I think that the amount... Now, if you get like PSA 10 base set 2 or PSA 10 Unlimited even, it might have some more of that upside. But it's very difficult for cards that there are massive amounts of to explode as easily in price. Whereas if you just have a couple of copies on the market, it can just be a few really wealthy people who are going to bid each other up and move that card. So that's basically what I would say. I personally, of all of those, I tended to have always liked Shadowless, but I actually think the Shadowless Zard, believe it or not, I think the Shadowless Zard, I think the other Shadowless cards are undervalued. I've always felt that way. And I tend to target the other ones. I buy lots and lots of Shadowless cards, I will say, and I'm always looking for them. And I always find that Shadowless cards in all sorts of random grades just sell for super cheap and slip way below. And I just think that they're great items to just be like slowly picking up over time. It's my personal opinion. I think that there's something about that Shadowless card that just hits for me. And when you can buy like Shadowless, like I bought like a Shadowless Alakazam, PSA 5, PSA 6s for like $20, $15. Like, just because it's a low grade, it's still a beautiful looking card in already graded. I don't know. I just think that there's a lot of value there. So. Alien Ant says, what are your thoughts on the current state of MetaZoo and the latest Wilderness release? So, yeah, I follow it. So what I've heard is there are supposedly 100,000 first edition boxes, which I guess is twice the size of Nightfall was 50,000, and I heard that there are 50,000 released in the States and 50,000 released for the rest of the world, I guess, is the numbers that I was told. So, the booster box is selling anywhere between like 100 and 125 or something that they're selling right now. I think that they've come back up a little bit. I saw a bunch disappear from TCG Player, I think in large part because of Rudy's video and just sort of the announcement that there were these serialized cards and maybe people pulling some of that stock off the market and then also people kind of buying out some of the lower stock. Will that come back down? Absolutely could. Will it stay at the 120 price? Absolutely could. Will it go up to like 150? Absolutely could. That would be the range. I would see it, unless Nightfall goes up quite a bit, I would think it'd be difficult for this to go up as much as Nightfall. I also think Nightfall with a Mothman and with Headless Horseman and, some of the darker themed cards, it's probably a stronger collector set. I think that there's probably more appeal in that set. I think this set has some dragons in it, but not dragons that I think are that well known. Even though some of the cards look really cool, and then it relies sort of heavily on the Cumberland Dragon, which I don't think is that popular. I think it's medium popular, and instinctually, just from a random person, and Bigfoot, the Bigfoot cards. Now, of course, the serialized cards and the golden ticket, we don't know what that golden ticket does yet. I think nobody knows. Be interesting, but I enjoy MetaZoo. I bought some. I plan on opening some for fun, but I'm not investing in MetaZoo. I think that there's a lot of other options from more established card companies when we talk about stocking. When we talk about investing or the fundamentals, is there quite a bit of upside potential? Of course there's always upside potential in it. And obviously there's that's all I'll say. Okay. Mason says, when entire divisions of multi-billion-dollar companies fail at making TCGs, what hope do a few people have in creating a game long term? Yeah. I think it's also about sort of their expectations, how much money these people have who are creating these games. And can they, are they going to be are they looking to support themselves full time? How much profit are they looking to make, in order to keep these games going? How big do they want these games to be? And it's not something that I'm, anywhere near an expert in. I actually am interested in potentially maybe doing some more consulting work or taking some jobs more for card companies, in part so I can learn a little bit more of the ins and outs of the business side, of all the margins and what works, what doesn't. Marty Martian says, Jake, my question is, how do you feel about the Japanese market, and what is your favorite Japanese card? Oh my gosh. Favorite Japanese card. That's going to be impossible to say. Some Japanese cards I like. I guess I'll just go Versus Series, you can't really go wrong. Honestly, the Charizard from Versus Series is sweet. But there's so many cool looking cards from Versus Series. I love the Houndoom from Versus Series. I think there are probably two different ones. I think it's the Karen's Houndoom that I really like. It's been a while since I've looked at that set. But that set's sick. So many cool arts from that set. Bending Series is cool. A lot of cool, interesting arts. So that would be probably my answer for that. Overall, how do I feel about the Japanese market? I'm not sure. I mean, it's such a broad market, I appreciate the questions a lot, but it's also just difficult to, answer something like that. So I could take it in a lot of different ways. I guess it's my job to figure out which way to take it. So Japanese market. So, it's definitely softened. I think it went up pretty huge. All right, here's how I want to answer that. So this is what I think is interesting about the Japanese market. I think the modern Japanese market is interesting. I think it's going to be interesting to see which sets people prefer in English and which sets people prefer in Japanese, and how the Japanese sealed boxes are doing compared to the Japanese singles and the Japanese graded cards in some of these modern products. I think it's really interesting, for example, how expensive CP6 is and how cheap the graded holos are from CP6, even though there aren't that many of them graded. That I find very interesting. I find it very interesting how expensive, and then how some of these booster boxes, like how cheap some of like the rainbow rares are from like Tag Team, in Japanese, from some of the Tag Team sets. I think that's interesting to me to see. Will that remain over time? Will that change? How heavily were those printed as compared to the English? Do people prefer modern English? Do people prefer modern Japanese? Does that shift at all over time? That's the stuff I'm really interested in watching. I think mostly Japanese vintage is probably in a pretty reasonable spot, and a pretty like a more sensible spot now than I think it was in the past. Whereas I think it was like far too cheap compared to English. I think there's more weirdness and irrationality in the modern side. All right, we got 15 minutes left. I'm going to jump to the bottom of the chat. I apologize if you did not get your question answered. I very much appreciate all the questions. I just do my best to answer everything in a very full way. Next time I'll try to speed run a little more. All right. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the bottom, and I'll go from there. Okay, we got some questions here. Panini Fortnite cards, my thoughts. I'm just not a big fan, to be completely honest. I've looked into it more. They're very expensive. It's not for me. In large part because I don't like Fortnite. I don't have a connection to Fortnite either, and I'm just not certain kids. The kids have so many video games. I don't know if they're going to be collecting that. I don't know how that's going to work over time, or if they're going to want that versus like collecting Fortnite in some other way. I don't know. Too much that I'm not sure about with something like that. What else we got here? All right. Joe Cartwright says, have you seen the sample Mothman auction that's currently at $60K on eBay? I have not. That is insane. Crazy. Yeah, those were going for like 30,000 privately. I was hearing like private offers and private sales more in the 30K range. And that was probably back at when, gosh, it's so hard to place the timing. That might have been when the Kickstarter boxes were like 4,000 to 6,000. So the Kickstarter boxes are a bit more expensive now, although I think they have come back maybe to 6,000 to 8,000 now. So I don't know. It's the first public one. Crazy. Who knows? I mean, these things can go for whatever people are willing to pay, you know? And listen, if MetaZoo becomes successful long term, that 60K, you know, only 100 copies of like the key card, you know, forever, you know, who knows? Anything's possible. That's crazy, though. Evolving Skies versus Eevee Heroes. Yeah, it gets into what I was talking about before about the it's very interesting Japanese versus English, and what do the booster boxes do versus the I think that it is possible that there is a play to be made. It's a risky play, I think, but I think that there's a bit of a play to be made in some graded Japanese singles, buying them raw and then grading them. And if you really want to go crazy, some of them are really easy to grade. Going to grade them with like CGC or BGS and trying to get some black labels and CGC 10s. So it's risky for sure because I don't know how the demand isn't really there right now, but I've been looking at some of the pop reports versus the English. It's interesting. And then some of the booster box prices, which are higher than the English. It's interesting. You have to be careful with stuff like that, though, because the reality is that there might be a lot of like sealed collectors who really like collecting sealed Japanese, but there aren't a lot of people who are collecting the actual cards or the actual cards graded. And that's just people's preferences, and that may continue. You just never know. Where do I see celebrations in 10 years? Okay. Think even with it being printed to the clouds, it marks a significant time in Pokemon's history. Having packs of other sets, I feel, helps it to. Yeah. So, I mean, the honest answer, it's a bit of a cop-out. I have no idea. I have no idea how much is being printed as compared to like evolutions, or compared to like generations, or compared to like, others, like a specialty set like Hidden Fates or something like that. I really don't know. I don't think anyone knows. I think it's like anyone's guess, and people are, I will tell you that in other hobbies, now we don't really have a lot of cards to compare this with. Like what Pokemon is doing, we can't really compare this to like something like Magic has done, and that we just don't have a lot of card history to compare it to. But if we compare it to like reprinted comic arts, or if we compare it to like reprinted like sports cards, reprints have not done well over time and have held very little value. Now in Pokemon, that is not the case. Pokemon reprints, look at evolutions. Like Pokemon and reprints have done extremely well. The fact that evolutions, for the amount that was printed and the amount of those singles that exist, like the fact that that PSA 9 Evolutions Charizard is still like around $100, even though it's come all the way down from $1,200. It's been, it's like a 2% decrease or something, just absolutely ridiculous how much that card has gone down. But the fact that it's still over $100, which is pretty decent, to be honest, given the amount of those cards that exist in the world and the amount that are being graded, it is, it's still like, it shows you that like people like reprints in Pokemon. Like the market right now has decided we like reprints. We think they're cool. And even though there's a ton of unlimited base, we want reprints, and we're going to pay for reprints. And we like mint cards, and we prefer modern mint reprints to old damaged vintage cards. Now, if you look in comic books or you look in sports cards, they've decided a completely different thing. So for example, like a just beat to hell Batman, the original Batman comic, would be worth like many hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay. A perfect copy of that comic from like 1984, one of the copies, that's going to be much more limited. There's much less of that one printed than something like Evolutions was printed. There's a ton of these reprinted comics printed, but Evolution's probably even more. The amount of charges is even more, but whatever. But the amount of that comic reprinted, that comic in a perfect grade is worth $80. $80, $400,000 for a one. Pokemon has decided at this point in history something completely different. Now, does that continue? I don't know. It worries me. It worries me how little people are aware of that, how much people care. I don't know how these things age in the long, long, long run. Like when people look back on these time periods, do they give a crap about these reprints? Or if the originals are still available, do they just buy those? And then do these reprints, can they really go up? And part of why I think that Evolutions went up so much is because we had a grading mania this year where people, and I think the grading mania is still going on, where people are paying $1,000 for a Black Label Amazing Rare. Like a card that is worth 50 cents to $1.50. People are paying $1,000 for. I think it's the same type of madness that had people caring about getting a PSA 10 Evolutions Charizard. And there's this narrative sold that like Evolutions is a like really important historical set in the hobby. And in other hobbies, the reprints are considered junk. Like the reprints are not considered historical important moments in those hobbies, and the prices reflect that. So it is what it is. There are tons of reprints of like Mickey, like you have like key sports cards that were reprinted. The reprint's worth $1. The original's worth thousands of dollars. So there's just tons of examples. Grandpa Joe says it's because people are not gonna be able to afford the cards. So that's just not the case though, right? Like people, you can easily afford an unlimited beat up Charizard for less. Like they're fairly, like you could get like an LP like Charizard at the time Evolutions was selling for like $1,200 in a PSA 9. You could have bought like an unlimited like PSA 8 for that price, or like a PSA 9 Evolutions Charizard. You know, I mean, it's just crazy. You know, or maybe the 8s were going for about 2,000 at that time actually. So the 8s would have been quite a bit more. So you could have bought a 7. A 7 was probably 1,200. If you compare these to these other hobbies, like a 7 would have been 1,200 and the reprint would have been $10. Like that's the type of like percentage we're talking about in other hobbies. And I know I've talked this point to death earlier on the channel, but I haven't said it, you know, in a while. It's just something for people to be aware of. Now, do I see this hobby going that way? No. I think that for right now and for the foreseeable future, the hobby and the people in this hobby have decided, and a lot of the leaders of the hobby and a lot of the collectors of the hobby have decided that reprints are valuable, and that just because something is reprinted, it doesn't mean that it's less valuable. It still has its own unique identity, it's its own unique set, and it still has its own unique value. And again, it goes back to, it doesn't matter what I think. The market decides. It's all supply and demand at the end of the day. If the demand is there, it's going to be valuable. Okay, so going back to celebrations, that's what I would say, is that I'm a little bit concerned, but if the demand is there, it'll be valuable. And there's other places that I would put my money, but you have to collect and invest in things that make sense to you. Mason says, what do you think of the theory that because people didn't take care of these things as a kid, that the reprints allow them to start over and take care of their nostalgic childhood cards? It's possible that that's part of it. I don't know. It's interesting, like psychologically. I truly believe that if a bunch of YouTubers and influencers didn't come onto YouTube and other places and talk about how great Evolutions was, and instead said that it's reprints and it's not that great, and you had leaders of the hobby say that, like they said in other hobbies, it would have been a very different experience. In the long run, I don't know where it goes. You know. Reek says, Jake, can we chat about fractionalization trend gaining momentum? And I want to add one more thing, Mason. So to that, I think where we really see this start to matter is 20 to 30 years from now. Because I think in a long time, like when the originals become really old, even though Evolutions will also become older, what we've seen in other hobbies is that the reprints, although they also become older, the reprints don't gain in value. It's just the originals that continue to gain in value. It'll be interesting to see if that's what happens here. Mason says, I just glean that info from what people say in my store when they buy the stuff. That's very interesting. I don't know if that will make it for like an investment, like that people are going to continue paying $100 or $200 or $300 just to have another chance to like keep their card in good condition. I think it makes sense when those booster boxes were $100 or $200 for people to like break them open and just have that nostalgia fun, and to create like a binder set of like the cards they missed for cheap. That I totally get. When it gets to $1,000, it's like it just becomes like, I don't think people are buying it. I think people are buying it and cracking it as an investment also. I don't think there are very many people on this planet who can justify opening an $1,000 booster box of something for pure fun and nostalgia. And certainly there were not enough compared to the amount that was opened, in my opinion. So. And again, in other hobbies, Mason, I would say that they would like so much rather have bought, like, you could have bought like 5 base set packs, or maybe 3 base set packs, depending on what the prices were at those times, or maybe even only 2 at the height. 2 base set packs for that part. So, we'll see. Okay, Reeks has a question here. I'm going to get to these final few questions. Again, really appreciate everyone's awesome questions. And again, these are just my opinions. I'm not, and I'm really trying to say where I'm stating opinion and where I'm stating fact, right? I'm stating data and facts from other hobbies to support some of my opinions, right? But as I said before, it does not matter what I think or even what other hobbies did. This hobby is different. And people can decide whatever they want for this hobby. And yes, I do think that base set is so popular and important in people's lives that it's like any reprint of those cards is going to hit to some degree in a different way, even more than like an Action Comics #1, these types of things. I just think that Pokemon's at a whole nother level. I think that's part of it. I think Pokemon is just so popular, and cards in particular are at a whole nother level of like addiction and the way it releases dopamine in our brains that that can explain it too. Okay, Reeks, Jake, can we chat about fractionalization trend gaining momentum and the potential impact on rare collectibles liquidity/price? Do you see a future for mass adoption of fractionalized collectibles? Short answer, I really have no idea. Again, people like Logan Paul, from a business model, it's not attractive. Like the only attractive part of any of that to me is the liquidity, is the fact that I can like easily buy and sell and get in and out of something a lot more easily. And the fact that I don't have to worry about like my item getting lost in shipping or my item getting damaged or like all of that stuff. But again, you could just like put your items in like the PWCC or eBay Vault or something like that. Which would solve part of that issue. But if they can create a marketplace where it's really like stocks, where you sell things by pressing like one button and then it somehow sells, that would be the only attractive part. Now, the other part, but to me, the so far, what these fractionalization companies are really offering is you're gonna pay a premium. Like, they need to make money, right? So they are either taking your money and then buying things under market and then selling it back to you at market. That's one possibility. Or they're taking your money and they're buying things at market and then selling it back to you at over market. In that case, you are paying above market for something, and the only reason, the reason or the market or the business strategy is that you are willing to pay above market because it's the only way that you can ever own this item, because this item is so expensive. Let's take a Pikachu Illustrator or whatever the item is. It's so expensive that you will never be able to own this item yourself. But using this platform, you can own a share, you can own a portion. Now, it is yet to be proven to me that owning a portion of a card feels like ownership. If that does feel like ownership to people, and that concept and idea really connects with people, then it is possible that it's a good business model, because it is providing a service, which is, hey, we're going to make money. We get the premium, we make some money off of all this, but you get to own or feel some ownership over a card that you would never be able to afford otherwise. Now, it's a little bit hard for me to imagine psychologically how me having some tokens on a screen, because I feel like a big part of ownership is my right to do with the thing that whatever I want. So part of why ownership of NFTs make a lot more sense than this type of ownership, and ownership of NFTs is questionable too, because that's a whole nother topic, but it does relate to this in terms of like, can people feel ownership of like digital assets? But at least when you own an NFT, you can sell it. Like, you control that piece of code or whatever. You control that code. In this case, you don't actually control anything, I don't think. Now, I haven't read the fine print, but I imagine maybe if you own like majority share or something, I've not looked into it too much, but if you own like majority share, you have some sort of, or you have some sort of voting right. I imagine like if you own a percentage, you have a voting right, and like everyone votes if it sells. But the point is that you don't actually control the item. You don't get to keep the item. You don't get to decide where that item is stored. You don't get to decide when that item is sold. And that to me is a huge part of ownership and what gives that psychological feeling of ownership. And I'm not sure if without that you can create the feeling of ownership. So that's what I'll say about that. They're clearly putting a lot of money into it. I think Logan Paul, right? Logan Paul is like promoting one of them now. And, I mean, these guys are excellent at marketing. And maybe they've thought all this out. Maybe they've tested it with people and it's been highly effective. So it'll be interesting to watch, for sure. The worry is that, here's the worry, okay? And I've heard, and I'm sure people have come out and said this is probably really unethical and really gross and all these types of things. Here's the worry, okay? When you have a bad business model, in order to be successful, you need to rely more on marketing and borderline manipulating people into buying something that's not good for them. And that's the danger here. So if this does not actually provide value for people in the sense that it doesn't actually, you don't feel ownership, it doesn't help you actually own a card that's outside of your reach in a way that feels good to you, in a way that you enjoy. If it doesn't do that, then this thing has no value to people and you're just paying more than you would if you just bought something online. Okay, and you're basically just wasting money and buying into, and the only people who are profiting off of it are the people who own the company and the people who are investing in the company. And the danger of poor business models is they often depend on influencers, and they depend on getting people addicted to things, and they depend on, heavy marketing to basically manipulate you and confuse you and convince you that this is something that you need and you want, when in reality you don't, and it's not good for you. And so I will make videos if that starts to happen, and I feel confidently that and I've come out, I've made some, videos about different influencers and different people in the past. I will share that opinion if it comes to that. That's what I would watch. And that's what always concerns me whenever I hear a business model that doesn't make a lot of sense, but yet I hear big influencers jumping on. Is that just a money-making quick, scheme based on reputation and following and trying to get people who want to get rich quick? And then is that sort of like a house of cards, type scenario? So those are my thoughts. Felix F says, seems just like why people would buy a stock in Apple. It's because they hope they can sell it for more, regardless of how they feel about it. Nor does it feel to me like ownership in my account. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I do think, though, that a lot of the value of collectibles, Felix, is ownership. Like, a lot of the reasons why people pay a lot of money for these items is the feeling of ownership. It's part of the value of collectibles. Whereas the value of a stock is you're buying stock in a company that creates something, that builds something, right? It has a business model. And so when you buy a share in that company, the share is not the product. Does that make sense? Like, you're buying a share of a company that is creating value or creating a product. In this case, the value is the ownership, right? This card only has value because it feels good to own it. And if you remove that, then where's the value? Now, the value might be in eventually this company selling it to someone else who will actually own it and feel ownership. And in the meantime, you're just buying a share in a stock. And in that case, I agree with you, Felix. And it might work. But then I guess my response is their whole argument, Felix, right? The whole marketing campaign is built around the reason this makes sense to do is because you will be able to own a piece of history. Like, that's literally built into their marketing. It's not like this item is going to outperform other items. Like, you buy Apple stock over some other stock, not because, I mean, some people buy Apple just because they love it, right? And they're kind of, you know, whatever. But most people buy Apple stock because, not because they care about that stock or it makes them feel good to own that stock, but more because they think that stock is going to outcompete something else. But they're not saying buy this Illustrator. The marketing isn't buy this Illustrator because it's going to outcompete something else. The argument is buy this Illustrator because this is going to be your only way to own a card of this value. And now if they're marketing or they're telling people that these high-end trophy cards are going to outcompete or do better than every other card in the hobby that you can afford, and that this is your only way to buy into those, then I actually agree with you, Felix. I think that if their marketing is saying that, then I see no issue. And if they take a commission or something on that, on being able to put that money together, I actually see no issue with it. I'm not sure I love it in the sense that, like, it'd be cooler if, like, someone who really, like, loves that card owns that card. But I suppose eventually it'll get to a collector anyway. But from business perspective, I actually agree with you, and I do see how that could be a viable model that people would be interested in. I just think it's kind of ridiculous, to be honest, like investing in a little bit items like that. But I don't know. We shall see. I guess it could be fun, and it might depend on the fees that they charge and other sorts of things. So we shall see. But definitely interesting points, Felix. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so I think we're going to end it there. Thank you all so much for questions and comments. Really appreciate it. If you can, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, comment, all that stuff helps. The biggest way you can support is obviously joining the Patreon. Hopefully you are getting way more than $10 of value. The people who are in there, my hope would be that you were getting, your money's worth plus there. Definitely continue dropping videos and all sorts of things on the channel, as well as doing our monthly Patreon Zoom call where we go into deeper dives on the data. This month Dan is going to be doing a deep dive, I think, on CGC and what's going on there. He's still working on that. Otherwise, just really appreciate the continued support. It means so much. I can't say it enough. And I will see you guys all in the next one, hopefully. All right. I'm not sure when I'll be streaming again. Oh, I will say I'm actually going to be on someone else's channel, DeGreen Shiz. I'm going to be on his channel tomorrow. He invited me on to have a conversation, so I'm looking forward to that. Eventually, I want to have him on this channel, and also Rock Pokemon and some other people I've been trying to get on the channel for a while. So we will do all of that. But stay tuned for that, and see you all in the next one. All right, everyone, have a good night.